Glasgow is the stage for a fierce conflict, not of international origin, but a long-standing battle between two infamous crime families, the Lyons and the Daniels. Across decades, these factions have unleashed a wave of terror, committing assassinations and launching relentless attacks. The roots of this feud run deep. In this exploration, we unravel the underlying causes fueling the rivalry, seeking to understand factors contributing to the alarming escalation of violence, resulting in widespread death and destruction. Join us as we untangle the intricate web of circumstances that turned Glasgow into a battleground for the enduring conflict between the Lyons and the Daniels. Unfamiliar with the Lyons and Daniels rivalry? The Lyons, a notorious crime family from Glasgow's Peel Park, operate not only in the UK, but also extend influence to the UAE and Spain, with Scotland as their stronghold. At the helm is Stephen Lyons, currently on the run and suspected in Dubai. On the opposing side, the Daniels, led by Jamie Daniel, form another formidable crime family in Glasgow. Jamie Daniel, a significant figure alongside the Lyons, held substantial power and influence across Scotland. Their illicit enterprises included drug trafficking, money laundering, extortion, and blackmail. These activities have overwhelmed Glasgow with drugs, catapulting the city to a concerning position atop Europe's drug-related death statistics. The ongoing feud between the Lyons and the Daniels is a relatively recent development, spanning only a few decades but with profound repercussions for Glasgow. The conflict gained momentum in 2001 when a cache of drugs was stolen from a residence in Milton, setting the stage for the bitter rivalry between these two crime families. The stolen drugs eventually made their way into the hands of the Lyons after being sold, marking the inciting incident that fueled the animosity. This theft deeply infuriated the Daniels, triggering a turf war that transformed Glasgow into a war-torn landscape. The critical factor exacerbating the situation was the location of the incident: Milton, a territory firmly controlled by the Lyons. From the perspective of the Lyons, the Daniels' incursion into Milton from Peel was perceived as a direct threat to their established territory. In response to encroachment, the Lyons swiftly addressed the issue. Both crime families armed themselves, escalating into a cycle of retaliatory attacks. This marked the start of the enduring feud between the Lyons and the Daniels, persisting even 2 decades after the initial drug theft. Over the years, ongoing hostilities have led to violent confrontations, profoundly shaping Glasgow's landscape. The saga between the Lyons and the Daniels family spans 2 decades, underscoring the intense and enduring nature of their feud. In the year 2021 alone, the Scottish police were actively investigating over 70 incidents tied to the ongoing turf wars. The actual number may be higher, given the clandestine nature of many such occurrences. Several noteworthy incidents have come to light, and one such case involves Gerbil Carroll. Carroll's familiarity with both the Lyons and the Daniels traced back to his childhood, marked by bullying experiences at the hands of Stephen Lyons and his brother during school. This early animosity fueled a deep-seated hatred for the Lyons brothers. Simultaneously, Carroll formed close bonds with the sons of Jamie Daniel, namely Robert and Francis. Unsurprisingly, Carroll eventually emerged as a trusted lieutenant and enforcer within the Daniels' ranks. Under Carroll's command, a ruthless team of thugs was assembled, their objective being what they referred to as alien abductions. This sinister practice involved abducting drug dealers or rival gang members, subjecting them to brutal torture to extract information, money, drugs, or weapons. Carroll displayed extreme cruelty during these sessions, leaving his victims traumatized, nearly naked, and utterly distraught by the end of these harrowing ordeals. The Lyons strongly suspected that Carroll had desecrated the grave of one of their family members, Gary Lyons. In response, Kevin became the target of the Lyons, with the first attack taking place in front of his mother's home. Despite surviving the initial assault, Kevin persisted in his illicit activities. However, the second attack proved fatal. Kevin was seated in the back of a car in a bustling supermarket parking lot, unable to escape as the child lock was engaged. In a swift and brazen act, masked assailants approached the car and shot Carroll, ending his life in less than a minute and in broad daylight. Ross Monaghan emerged as a suspect in the murder of Kevin Carroll. Monaghan, a known associate of the Lyons, was not convicted, as the case collapsed. Nevertheless, in the eyes of the Daniels, he remained guilty and warranted punishment for his alleged involvement in the killing. In January 2017, Ross Monaghan faced a retaliatory attack as he was taking his daughter to school. The assailant, disguised as a woman with a buggy, turned out to be a hired hitman. Miraculously, Monaghan survived the attack and sought refuge in Spain. However, the thirst for revenge persisted. In December 2006, the Daniels orchestrated another assault. This time, the targets were Stephen Lyons, Michael Lyons, and Robert Pickett. Tragically, Michael lost his life, while the other two sustained severe injuries. The assailants, identified as Raymond Anderson and James MacDonald, were recognized as hitmen employed by the Daniels. Both received a staggering sentence of 35 years, marking the longest prison term ever handed down by a Scottish court. In December 2016, Robert Daniel, a member of the Daniels family, fell victim to a brutal assault. While in his car, Robert's vehicle was intentionally rammed by another car. Recognizing the danger, he attempted to escape, but his assailants pursued him to a house where they ultimately overpowered him. During the attack, Robert suffered 2 machete blows to the back of his head. Fortunately, he managed to survive the assault. Though the assault was strongly suspected to be the work of the Lyons, when questioned in court about any existing animosity between the Lyons and the Daniels, Robert Daniel stated, "Not that I know of." This response added a layer of complexity to the ongoing conflict, raising questions about the motives behind the violent attack on Robert Daniel. Shifting to another unsettling incident, we turn to the case of Stephen Bonzo Daniel. In a covert move, the Lyons surreptitiously installed a tracker on Stephen's car. The situation escalated in May 2017 when Stephen found himself ambushed by members of the Lyons gang. The pursuit unfolded from Milton to the M8 in Glasgow, culminating in a violent attack. Despite being struck with knives and machetes, Stephen Daniel miraculously survived, with his injuries so severe that first responders initially believed he had been shot. Once again, the Lyons were suspected as the orchestrators of this assault. Similar to Robert Daniel's case, Stephen Daniel also asserted in court that there was no feud between the Lyons and the Daniels. In fact, he went to the extent of claiming that the Daniels were not a crime family and had no real enemies. This denial of animosity between the two factions is a recurring theme, creating an open secret, where both the Lyons and the Daniels publicly deny any conflict while, behind closed doors, seeking what they perceive as justice through violent means. Adding another layer to the complex dynamics, both the Lyons and Daniels seem to operate with a degree of impunity, fortified by influential connections within the echelons of power. This privileged status often affords them the latitude to act with relative impunity in various scenarios. Sadly, a substantial number of attacks or killings orchestrated by these crime families fail to see justice in courts, largely due to the collapse of cases stemming from insufficient evidence. As of today, the conflict between the Lyons and Daniels continues unabated. Despite efforts by authorities to curb gang violence, tangible results have been elusive. For a significant duration, the Daniels held the upper hand in the feud until the demise of their leader, Jamie Daniel, in July 2016. His death, attributed to cancer, left the Daniels family grappling with disarray and a leadership vacuum, altering the dynamics of the ongoing struggle between the two crime families. This turn of events disadvantaged the Daniels, giving the Lyons the upper hand in the ongoing conflict. Complicating matters, the leader of the Lyons is currently on the run, with his last known location in Dubai. However, he had to relocate following raids by authorities in Dubai. Both the Daniels and the Lyons find themselves in a diminished state compared to their previous strength. Yet the hostilities persist, with the two crime families still locked in a fierce battle. The ultimate resolution of this feud remains uncertain, and only time will reveal its outcome. The deep-seated animosity between the Lyons and the Daniels is not easily mendable. Both factions harbor a mutual desire for the destruction of the other, perpetuating a tragic conflict that has had profound consequences for many Scots. It is sobering to consider that this prolonged feud originated from stolen drugs that neither crime family seems to care about anymore. As the bloodshed continues, one can't help but question if the cost has been worth it.
On the evening of April 17, 2019, at around 8 p.m., Bradley Welsh had just finished a grueling workout at the Holyrood boxing gym in Edinburgh, a place he had built from the ground up. He was in the prime of his life, physically fit and mentally strong, having worked tirelessly to leave behind the troubled past that had once defined him. Bradley had grown to become a beloved figure in his community, known for his contributions to local charity work, especially helping at-risk youth find direction through boxing. After the session, Bradley walked out into the fresh evening air, the streets of Edinburgh calm, as the sun dipped below the horizon. He parked his blue Fiat Uno across the street from his flat, located in the new town area of Edinburgh on Chester Street. This was home to him, a modest yet comfortable place where he lived with his partner and young child. As Bradley made his way down the steps toward his flat, he was greeted by a friendly neighbor, a brief but familiar exchange before the tragic events unfolded. In an ordinary moment, as he walked toward his front door, he had no idea that this would be his last journey. Out of nowhere, a man appeared from the shadows and shot him at point-blank range in the head, leaving Bradley lifeless on the pavement. The loud, shocking sound of the gunshot echoed through the still night, immediately drawing the attention of the neighbor. The man rushed out, only to find Bradley already dead, his body slumped in the street, his life extinguished in an instant. The assassin had not cared about the bloodshed, nor the public nature of his crime. Inside Bradley's apartment, his family remained unaware of the tragedy that had just struck. His partner, a woman who had seen the positive changes in Bradley's life over the years, would soon learn that the man she loved was gone. Bradley Welsh's death shocked not only his family, but the entire city of Edinburgh. He wasn't a criminal or a gang member. He was a man who had spent years trying to atone for his troubled past, a man who had fought his way out of the darkness and into the light. His story was tragic, not only because of his death, but because of the senseless violence that took it away. Bradley Welsh's life was far from ordinary, shaped by experiences that most people could never imagine. Born in Edinburgh, he spent much of his early years entangled in the city's criminal underworld. As a teenager, he became involved with the Capital City Service, a notorious group of football hooligans. Their violent clashes with rival supporters became a defining part of Bradley's early identity, a reflection of the anger and turmoil that he felt growing up. In his late teens, Bradley's criminal lifestyle led him down a dangerous path. He was convicted for his involvement in a protection racket, and his time behind bars became a turning point. However, instead of sinking deeper into a life of crime, Bradley decided to change. Upon his release, he sought out a new way of life and found boxing. In 1993, Bradley walked into a local gym, where he was introduced to the sport that would forever change his life. He quickly proved to be a natural, earning his place in the boxing world. By the time he was 23, Bradley had already won the British Amateur Lightweight Championship. His dedication to the sport was unparalleled, and it soon became clear that boxing was more than just a hobby. It was his calling. At 24, Bradley turned professional and his career blossomed. He went on to win 8 out of his 9 professional fights, solidifying his status as a promising boxer. But Bradley's true passion lay not just in fighting for himself, but in helping others. After retiring from competitive boxing, he opened the Holyrood Boxing Gym in 2005, where he became a mentor to countless young people. The gym was a place for troubled youth to find direction, offering them a refuge from the streets and the opportunity to learn discipline and respect. Bradley was not just teaching boxing, he was teaching life skills. Many of the kids who came to the gym were from underprivileged backgrounds, and Bradley's influence helped them stay out of trouble. His gym became a sanctuary, a beacon of hope for those who had none. Despite his success in boxing and community work, Bradley Welsh was not immune to controversy. His past, however hard he tried to escape it, followed him. In 2010, Bradley appeared in Danny Dyer's Deadliest Men, a documentary that highlighted the lives of notorious criminals. In the series, Bradley spoke about his youth and his involvement with the CCS, giving Danny Dyer a tour of Edinburgh's most dangerous neighborhoods. At the time, Bradley was known as a man who had been involved in violent incidents, and many still saw him as a product of his rough upbringing. His appearance on the show only reinforced this image. Bradley's connection to violence wasn't limited to his past affiliations. In 2014, after a frustrating experience with the airline Jet2, he gained national attention when he printed 15,000 leaflets criticizing the company for losing his suitcase. He joked that the bag contained Viagra and that losing it ruined his Valentine's Day plans. His bold, rebellious nature was evident in this small act of defiance, but it also spoke to his unwillingness to back down from any challenge, no matter how trivial it seemed. Though he had worked hard to leave his past behind, Bradley struggled to move beyond the tough guy image that many had of him. In 2017, he made a cameo in Trainspotting 2, playing the role of Mr. Doyle, a gang boss. It was a small part in an iconic film, but it was another step in Bradley's efforts to break free from the stereotypes of his past. Despite this, he continued to find himself pigeonholed into roles that reflected his tough exterior, both in the media and in public perception. On that fateful evening in April 2019, as Bradley made his way back to his apartment, the unthinkable happened. The gunman, Sean Orman, had been lying in wait for Bradley. Orman, a man with a history of violent behavior but no formal ties to organized crime, was a pawn in a larger, darker game. When he pulled the trigger, Bradley never had a chance. The shot rang out, and the life of one of Edinburgh's most beloved figures was taken in an instant. As Bradley's neighbor stepped outside to enjoy a cigarette, the sound of the gunshot echoed through the street. Turning around, he saw Orman, shotgun in hand, standing over Bradley's lifeless body. The shooter looked directly at him and ordered him not to look. Terrified, the neighbor immediately fled into his apartment, too afraid to act, knowing that the gunman was still on the loose. Orman didn't care that he had committed murder in a busy area, nor that his actions were being witnessed by passers-by. After firing the fatal shot, he fled the scene and jumped into a stolen Ford Cougar. Paramedics arrived at the scene within minutes, but it was too late. Bradley Welsh was dead. The police immediately launched a murder investigation, but the case quickly became complicated. They had few leads. CCTV footage, however, provided crucial evidence, showing the gunman fleeing the scene. He was described as a man in his 20s or 30s, slim with a tan, wearing distinctive footwear. The police, using this information, managed to narrow down their search to a man named Sean Orman. Orman, a violent offender with a history of criminal activity, was soon identified as the prime suspect. But Orman was no easy target. Days after the shooting, he was seen driving a vehicle at high speeds through Edinburgh. When police attempted to pull him over, he fled the scene, initiating a high-speed chase that reached speeds of over 120 miles per hour. The chase continued for miles, with Orman driving recklessly and ignoring the danger to others. Finally, police were able to stop him using a stinger device, and Orman was arrested. The investigation quickly revealed that Bradley's murder had been orchestrated as part of a larger gangland conflict between rival factions in Edinburgh and Glasgow. It was revealed that Orman had been paid £10,000 to kill Bradley Welsh. The motivation behind the murder was linked to an ongoing feud involving Mark Richardson, a notorious figure from Edinburgh's criminal world. Bradley, who had spent years trying to mediate between the rival factions, had become a target. His involvement in trying to calm tensions between the two gangs made him a threat to some, and his death was ordered by those who stood to gain from his removal. Dean White, a man who had once worked with Orman, bravely came forward as a witness, providing crucial testimony that helped unravel the conspiracy behind Bradley's death. The trial of Sean Orman took place in 2020. Despite his defense team trying to discredit Dean White's testimony, the jury found Orman guilty of both murder and attempted murder. He was sentenced to a minimum of 28 years in prison. However, the case didn't end there. The investigation into the circumstances surrounding Bradley's death raised questions about whether police had done enough to prevent the murder, given that warnings had been issued in advance. Bradley's family was devastated by the loss, but they were determined to seek justice. They rejected an apology from Police Scotland, believing that the police had failed to act on critical information in time to save Bradley's life. They continued to fight for accountability, demanding that those responsible for the failure to prevent the murder be held accountable. In the years that followed, Bradley Welsh's memory lived on, not just in the hearts of his family, but in the many lives he had touched through his boxing gym and charity work. A mural near Easter Road Stadium became a tribute to his legacy, a lasting reminder that while Bradley's life was tragically cut short, his influence on the community would endure.
Meet James Jasper McCann, Scotland's notorious most dangerous man emerging from the gritty East End of Glasgow. Infamous for brutal violence in his teens, he wielded a knife as weapon of choice, leaving an indelible mark on the streets. Despite a brief stint in a young offenders institution, he was released in under 2 years, his reputation attracting the attention of organized crime. As McCann re-entered society, his notoriety grew, becoming a focal point for older members in the criminal underworld. This exploration delves into the roots of his violent tendencies, exposing the ominous path that solidified his status as one of Scotland's most perilous figures. Stay tuned for the captivating story of James Jasper McCann, unraveling the complexities of his criminal journey and the dark world he inhabits. McCann, a prominent figure in local gangs, gained a reputation for executing tasks with unwavering resolve, irrespective of the required violence. Notably affiliated with the Daniels family and gangster Robert Kelby, he surpassed peers in connections, emerging as a high-level enforcer during a heated feud with drug kingpin Mark Richardson. McCann's loyalty was fleeting, motivated primarily by financial gain, as he auctioned his services to the highest bidder. Despite early notoriety with law enforcement, he persisted in the perilous underworld, displaying relentless determination in pursuing personal interests and navigating the shadows of criminal enterprises. His audacious approach and strategic alliances positioned him as a formidable force, making him a sought-after asset in the intricate web of underworld dealings. In 1996, James Jasper McCann began a substantial prison term for an unprovoked 1994 knife attack in Edinburgh. Despite telling the judge he was there because he felt Edinburgh was safer, even though he contributed to Glasgow's peril. McCann received a 7-year sentence for permanently disfiguring Stephen Walker. While in Shotts prison, he allegedly attempted to murder Tam McGraw, suspected of aiding the Serious Crime Squad. This incident unveils the intricacies of McCann's criminal history, characterized by violence, a penchant for danger, and a readiness to act, even behind bars. His actions showcased a turbulent journey through the criminal underworld, where alliances and conflicts shaped his trajectory. McCann's prison time mirrored the unpredictable nature of his life, marked by a relentless pursuit of his own agenda amidst the confines of legal consequences. His willingness to confront danger, both within and outside prison walls, added layers to his enigmatic criminal persona, leaving an indelible mark on the complex tapestry of his criminal legacy. McCann allegedly accepted a contract to assassinate Tam McGraw, leading to a brutal prison attack where he stabbed McGraw 3 times. Despite McGraw surviving, he adhered to the gangland code of silence. 6 weeks later, McCann faced retaliation orchestrated by Fergusley Park hardman Paul Sheehan, resulting in a stabbing. Ironically, Sheehan met a violent end in 2002 post-prison release. Following his release, McCann returned to crime, encountering another ultra-violent incident in August 2006. This tumultuous journey reflects McCann's resilience amid the perilous gangland landscape. His involvement in contract killings, retaliatory attacks, and brushes with death highlights the volatile dynamics within the criminal fraternity. McCann's ability to navigate these treacherous waters underscores the complexities and dangers inherent in the gangland lifestyle, where loyalty, revenge, and survival intertwine in a deadly dance. In a brazen daylight assault on the streets of Glasgow, George "Goofy" Docherty, an associate of the Lyons crime family, fell victim to a brutal attack that ultimately claimed his life. A knife-wielding hitman ambushed him, leaping out of a car that pulled up beside him. Docherty, anticipating danger, was clad in a stab-proof vest. Undeterred, the assailant repeatedly stabbed him in the legs and groin during this vicious attack. Once Docherty was incapacitated, the driver of the car took further gruesome measures, running over him and then reversing to ensure his demise. To solidify the outcome, the driver ran over him a 3rd time. Given Docherty's extensive list of enemies, stemming from his actions over the years, various parties could have orchestrated the hit. As a knife attack unfolded, It seemed plausible for James Jasper McCann to be pulled in for questioning. However, despite the police's efforts, they couldn't establish a direct link between McCann and the murder. Consequently, no one was charged in connection with Docherty's murder, leaving it unresolved. Several months later, in November 2006, McCann found himself in legal trouble once again. He was discovered in possession of a machine gun, a silencer, a revolver, and several rounds of ammunition at addresses linked to him. Charged with the possession of illegal weapons and ammunition, McCann was sentenced to 7 years in prison. Released in late 2011, he swiftly resumed his criminal activities, taking on the role of an enforcer for Robert Kelby in an ongoing feud with Edinburgh drug kingpin Mark Richardson. The tumultuous events surrounding McCann's life paint a vivid picture of the dangerous and unpredictable world he inhabited. Fueled by a desire for revenge for Robert Kelby's 2010 shooting, James Jasper McCann, with Mark Richardson incarcerated, sought out AGS Autos, a garage operated by Richardson's then-girlfriend's father, Stephen Dignan. At the garage's forecourt, McCann encountered Dignan's business partner, Gordon Archibald. An exchange of words escalated into a frenzied attack, with McCann slashing Archibald across the face and stabbing him in the stomach. In a twist of events, it appeared that McCann had targeted the wrong individual, as Dignan might have been the intended victim. However, the primary objective of the assault seemed to be sending a chilling message to Mark Richardson. A witness, present during the trial, vividly described the catastrophic injuries suffered by Archibald as he stumbled into the garage's waiting area. She recounted that the part of his face slashed by McCann was hanging down, touching his shoulder, and he had a severe cut from his ear to his mouth. The bleeding was profuse, prompting the woman to assist him to her car and urgently drive him to the hospital. This incident reflects the volatile nature of McCann's pursuit of vengeance and the lengths to which he was willing to go to communicate a brutal message within the intricate web of criminal feuds. In a bizarre turn of events, James Jasper McCann managed to walk free from the High Court in Edinburgh for an attack that, on the surface, seemed heinous. The victim, Gordon Archibald, too terrified to testify, resulted in the collapse of the case against McCann. The prosecution hinged on Archibald's testimony, but his fear of McCann paralyzed him, leading to the unraveling of the case as it commenced. Another incident serves as a testament to McCann's ruthless and callous nature. In 2014, he allegedly carried out a brutal knife attack on his own cousin, David Santini, a notorious heroin smuggling kingpin known for a £1.1 million heroin bust that landed him an 11-year prison sentence. The cousins had a falling out over money, prompting McCann and an associate to visit Santini at his luxurious residence. It is claimed that McCann viciously slashed Santini across the face, leaving an 8-inch gash. Despite facing charges for this attack, McCann once again managed to evade conviction, as Santini chose not to identify his assailant. In a peculiar pattern, McCann, with what seems like a stack of get-out-of-jail-free cards, found himself back behind bars a few years later. This time, he faced charges for a prolonged and torturous attack on a man named Paul Connor. The assault, orchestrated by McCann, his brother Robert, and associate Greg Bannerman, unfolded in 2 different flats, one in Glasgow and the other in Airdrie. The motive behind the attack was an attempt to extort money from Connor, who had received compensation for a car accident. During the brutal assault, Connor was choked, punched, and repeatedly struck with a claw hammer, while McCann menacingly conveyed his intent to kill him and dispose of his body. The disturbing sequence of events underscores the dark and violent path that McCann continued to tread. During this ordeal, Connor was informed that he would be injected with pure heroin to simulate an overdose, extending the torment for many agonizing hours. The horrific episode only concluded when, in a final act of desperation, Paul Connor managed to throw himself out of a first-floor window, escaping the clutches of his tormentors. In the aftermath, McCann, his brother, and Bannerman faced the legal consequences of their heinous actions. In 2019, they were handed sentences ranging from 5 to 9 years for their roles in the protracted torture of Paul Connor. Despite James McCann, once dubbed the most dangerous man in Scotland currently serving time behind bars, speculation arises about his future upon release. Will he revert to his violent tendencies, or is there a possibility of him leading a law-abiding life? The question lingers as McCann contemplates his eventual return to society.
In the early summer of 2020, an unexpected commotion unfolded in a prestigious beachfront community in Fortaleza, Brazil. Local residents were startled to witness a dramatic scene as Brazilian federal law enforcement, clad in full tactical gear and heavily armed, stormed a lavish apartment complex. The focus of their operation was a recent tenant who had maintained a low profile since his arrival just a few months prior. As the officers escorted the man from the building, onlookers were unaware that they were witnessing the capture of one of the United Kingdom's most sought-after fugitives. This individual had been evading authorities in connection with a major Scottish police investigation known as Operation Escalade. The operation targeted one of Scotland's most notorious and influential organised crime syndicates. The man's reserved behaviour during his brief stay was not a result of natural introversion, but rather a calculated effort to avoid detection while on the run from international law enforcement. James White's ascent to the apex of a major organised crime network marked a significant shift in the European drug trade landscape. His rise followed the mysterious disappearance of his predecessors, the Gillespie Brothers from Rutherglen, who had earned the moniker the Escobar Brothers for their extensive cocaine distribution across Scotland. The brothers, last seen in 2019, are presumed to have met a violent fate at the hands of their South American associates. In the wake of the Gillespies' disappearance, White swiftly assumed control of the operation. Concurrently, Police Scotland launched a public campaign to locate key members of the organisation who had fled abroad. This effort also targeted Christopher Hughes, who would later receive a 25-year sentence for his involvement in the murder of Dutch crime journalist Martin Koch. In a twist of fate, when Italian authorities apprehended Hughes at the Gliss Hotel in Turin in January 2020, White was present. Both men were using fraudulent passports obtained through a Kent-based forgery ring. While Hughes was detained, White managed to convince the Italian police of his false identity and evade capture. The passport fraud operation, run by Anthony Beard and Christopher Zatek, provided high-quality forged documents to various criminals over a 5-year period. These passports, though officially issued, were procured using false information and commanded prices between £5,000 and £20,000. After his narrow escape in Italy, White acquired another false identity and fled to Brazil. Despite being one of the UK's most wanted individuals, he continued to orchestrate criminal activities from abroad. Over a 2-month period in 2020, he exchanged thousands of encrypted messages with associates, arranging drug deals and orchestrating violent acts against rivals. While in Brazil, White became romantically involved with Paula Gomez, who later posted a heartfelt tribute to him on social media following his arrest. As his resources dwindled, White contemplated returning to the UK to face trial, discussing with his former wife the possibility of surrendering if he could amass sufficient funds and negotiate favourable terms. During the investigation into White's criminal network, authorities uncovered his involvement in 2 significant drug smuggling operations. The first came to light in November 2017, when Border Force officials in Dover intercepted an HGV containing cocaine valued at £10 million. The vehicle, which had travelled from Alicante, Spain, was destined for a shell company established by the gang in Rochdale, Greater Manchester. The cocaine, divided into 90 taped blocks, was concealed in secret compartments within the lorry. Investigators later discovered that this was just one of 17 similar shipments made over the preceding 2 years. Following this setback, White directed an associate to set up another front business in Glasgow to facilitate the continued importation of narcotics. This task fell to Paul Fleming, White's trusted lieutenant, also from Glasgow. Together they established a fake solar panel company called Adastra Off-Grid, ostensibly based in Spain, to serve as a cover for smuggling large quantities of cocaine from South American countries, including Brazil, Colombia, and Bolivia, into the UK. Their operation benefited from contacts established by David Sell, another gang member who had made frequent trips to Brazil to meet with high-ranking cartel members before his imprisonment in 2018. The scheme was further facilitated by Fleming's residence in Alicante and White's fluency in Spanish. In April 2020, Fleming sent a coded message to White, referencing the use of green lanes in shipping. a term for routes with minimal security checks for established companies. White's response, suggesting the addition of 100 kilograms to the next shipment, highlighted the scale of their operation. The sophistication of their smuggling methods was revealed when police raided an industrial unit in London, discovering solar panels with specially engineered compartments designed to conceal contraband. White's ruthlessness in maintaining control over the drug trade was evident in his treatment of former associate Robert Allen. Allen had incurred a £90,000 debt after failing to sell a cocaine shipment believed to belong to the Gillespie Brothers. This led to Allen fleeing Scotland to escape White's retribution. This account illustrates the complex and far-reaching nature of White's criminal enterprise, spanning multiple countries and employing sophisticated smuggling techniques. It also demonstrates the harsh internal dynamics of such organizations, where debts and perceived betrayals can lead to severe consequences. James White and his associates, including the Gillespie brothers, operated a dual-faceted enterprise that blended legitimate business with criminal activities. One of their notable ventures was the creation of an encrypted phone brand called Maximum Protection Communications, MPC. Alongside his involvement in drug trafficking, White also pursued a passion for boxing. He established Lockstock Promotions, which organized boxing events across Scotland, featuring emerging fighters. These events served a dual purpose, providing a platform to showcase new talent while also promoting the MPC brand. The group cleverly integrated MPC advertising into these events, featuring the brand on boxing ring floors and on t-shirts worn by promotional models. The MPC business model was straightforward yet profitable. The company would modify Google Nexus 5 or Nexus 5X Android phones, installing their own security features and operating system. They would then set up messaging accounts for customers and include a data-only SIM card. The initial cost for customers was £1,200 per device, with 6-month renewals priced at £700. Despite a relatively small customer base of around 5,000 phones, this model potentially generated about £6 million for the company. Some MPC devices were further customized for heightened security, with features such as removed microphones, cameras, and GPS functionality. Certain models even incorporated a dual boot mode, allowing users to access a secret file system containing encrypted communications by using a specific power-on sequence. These modifications made traditional law enforcement interception methods ineffective, as messages were typically only accessible on the user's device in readable form. In a disturbing turn of events, MPC was allegedly used as part of a scheme to target Dutch crime blogger Martin Koch. After Koch had mentioned Moroccan drug lord Ridwan Taghi on his blog, Vlinda's Crime, the criminal group devised a plan to gain Koch's trust. They paid him approximately €13,000 to run MPC advertisements on his website, reportedly with the ultimate goal of facilitating an attempt on his life by Taghi's associates. In June 2020, after only 6 months as a fugitive, James White's run came to an abrupt end when Brazilian authorities stormed his apartment. Following his arrest, White spent nearly 2 years in Brazilian custody, contesting his extradition to the United Kingdom. Investigations into White's finances revealed a stark contrast between his lavish lifestyle and his lack of legitimate income. Records showed no earnings since 2004, yet White and his ex-wife maintained a luxurious standard of living. This included paying a substantial monthly mortgage, hosting an extravagant wedding in 2015, and indulging in international holidays to destinations such as Mexico, the United States, and Paris. Law enforcement raids in 2017 and 2020 uncovered a trove of high-end possessions in White's home, including designer clothing, jewelry, and a watch valued at £21,000. Encrypted communications revealed further extravagant purchases, such as quad bikes and jet skis for their children, as well as home improvements funded by illicit cash. When White finally faced the Scottish courts in July 2023, the judge, constrained by legal limitations, imposed a sentence of 9 years and 10 months. The judge expressed that this sentence fell short of what he believed the crimes warranted, stating that White's offences were of the utmost seriousness and involved a degree of criminality rarely seen in Scottish courts. Had it been possible, the judge indicated he would have imposed a sentence exceeding 15 years. The court heard that for nearly a decade, White had been a senior member of an organised crime group operating across 3 continents, with activities spanning numerous countries including Scotland, England, Italy, the Netherlands, Belgium, Spain, Portugal, France, Russia, the United Arab Emirates, and Brazil. Paul Fleming, White's associate, pleaded guilty in July 2022 to directing gang activities between December 2017 and January 2022. His crimes included orchestrating the sale and supply of cocaine and cannabis, arranging drug and money storage locations, and organizing the importation of illegal firearms and ammunition. Fleming also admitted to instructing gang members on concealing and transporting cash to further their criminal enterprise. He received a 9-year prison sentence for his role in the organization. This case highlights the global reach and sophistication of modern organized crime networks, as well as the challenges faced by law enforcement in bringing such operations to justice. It also underscores the disparity that can exist between the severity of crimes committed and the sentences that can be legally imposed. In the shadow of Glasgow's post-industrial decline, Ian McAteer's life began on November 12, 1961, in Dalmuir, a rough neighborhood where opportunity was scarce and survival was a daily struggle. Raised amidst decaying factories, desolate tenements, and an economic landscape that promised little for those born into its most vulnerable corners, Ian's early years were filled with turmoil. His mother, struggling with addiction and mental health issues, was often absent from the family home, leaving Ian and his 4 siblings to fend for themselves. The youngest of the siblings, Ian, was sometimes neglected, with no clear direction or support system. By the time Ian was a teenager, his life had already been shaped by the cold, unforgiving streets. The threat of violence, the lure of petty theft, and the constant struggle for basic necessities became his reality. Foster care came and went, but the trauma of instability never left. Ian quickly learned that the world was not a kind place, and the only way to carve out any sense of control was to take what he could, even if it meant taking from others. As he wandered through the streets, he became acquainted with an undercurrent of crime that flowed through the heart of Glasgow. Petty thefts and small-time robberies were his introduction to a life of survival. By the age of 14, Ian had learned the skills of the streets, how to pick pockets, how to lie, and most importantly, how to avoid the authorities. Every day he faced a world that seemed set against him, but in the face of this adversity, he discovered his greatest strength, the ability to blend into the shadows, unnoticed and untouchable. Ian's teenage years saw him deepen his involvement in petty crime. By the age of 16, he was already involved in a gang of local troublemakers. It wasn't the first step in a larger criminal enterprise, but for Ian, it felt like the first real opportunity to prove himself. It was a tough, violent world in which a person's worth was determined by their ability to intimidate, steal, and survive. To Ian, the gang represented a way to gain respect in a society that had shown him little. The gang was involved in small-time criminal activities, extortion, drug dealing, shoplifting, and car theft. It was a tight-knit group, bound together by survival instincts and a shared disdain for the establishment. Ian quickly learned that to survive, he had to remain unpredictable, quick to react, and above all, ruthless. The consequences of failure in this world were severe, and Ian had witnessed the punishment dealt out to those who faltered. Beatings, betrayals, or worse, a violent end. The trust of his peers was everything, and Ian knew that to rise through the ranks, he had to prove his loyalty and his ability to get the job done. By the age of 18, Ian had earned his first reputation in the criminal world. A man who could take what he wanted without hesitation, but who also knew when to remain in the shadows. He had already begun engaging in more serious criminal activities, such as smuggling stolen goods and running errands for more powerful figures within Glasgow's underworld. It was during this time that Ian began to realize that to achieve true power, he needed to move beyond petty crime. The early 1980s were a time of transition in Glasgow, with the city teetering on the edge of economic collapse. As traditional industries faltered, a new wave of organized crime began to emerge. Opportunistic figures like Ian McAteer saw the crumbling economy as a chance to thrive. Drug trafficking, extortion, and the protection racket became lucrative businesses for those with the right connections and the courage to exploit the chaos. Ian's criminal enterprise began to expand as he connected with key players in Glasgow's growing drug trade. Heroin was beginning to flood the streets, and Ian seized the opportunity to align himself with powerful individuals involved in distribution. He quickly learned the mechanics of the drug trade, how to import, distribute, and sell narcotics without attracting too much attention. Ian's rise within the Glasgow criminal community was swift, with many seeing him as a figure to be reckoned with. He was a chameleon, able to blend into various social circles, whether among petty criminals or high-ranking figures in the drug underworld. But it wasn't just drugs that made Ian's empire grow. He quickly took control of several lucrative protection rackets, extorting local businesses and individuals who were desperate to avoid the violence that came with refusing to pay. It was during this time that he started to move in more dangerous circles, meeting with figures who controlled major operations in multiple cities, including Liverpool. Ian's ability to navigate this complex web of criminal connections soon earned him a reputation that stretched beyond Glasgow. His ambition knew no bounds, and he wasn't content with local notoriety. He sought power on a national level. As his criminal empire expanded, Ian was known for his ruthlessness and cunning. He built a network of loyal associates who feared and respected him. Violence was often the means by which Ian maintained control, and anyone who dared cross him paid the price. It was not uncommon for rival gang members or those who owed him money to disappear without a trace, their bodies never to be found. Despite his growing power and influence, Ian McAteer's life of crime was never without risk. His continued involvement in the drug trade, along with his growing list of violent offenses, eventually brought him to the attention of law enforcement. In 1993, after years of carefully orchestrated criminal activity, Ian was arrested and charged with multiple offenses related to drug trafficking and organized crime. The case against Ian was damning. The police had gathered enough evidence to convict him, and the media eagerly followed every twist and turn of his trial. Ian, ever the confident figure, made the decision to represent himself in court, a move that shocked both the prosecution and the public. His decision to defend himself only added to his notoriety, turning the trial into a spectacle that captivated the media. During the trial, Ian displayed his usual arrogance and defiance. He manipulated the courtroom with his charm and quick wit, often making light of the charges against him. But despite his efforts to evade the full weight of the law, the evidence against him was undeniable. He was convicted on all counts and sentenced to 5 years in prison. The media, hungry for a story, hailed it as the end of McAteer's reign, but Ian was far from finished. His time behind bars became a mere pause in his criminal career. The years following Ian's imprisonment were marked by an escalation in violence. Despite being locked away, he continued to exert control over his criminal operations from behind bars, orchestrating hits on rivals and ensuring that his empire did not crumble in his absence. The bloodshed, which had always been a part of Ian's world, reached a new peak during these years. Murders, assaults, and violent retributions became common as Ian solidified his position within Glasgow's criminal hierarchy. In 1999, a particularly brutal murder sent shockwaves through the criminal community. Warren Selkirk, a former associate who had become a liability due to his gambling debts, was lured into a trap and executed in a marina. The murder was carried out in a cold, clinical manner, a message to anyone who might think of crossing Ian McAteer. The details of the murder were chilling. It was a public execution, witnessed by Selkirk's children. The act was a statement of power, an unmistakable warning that Ian would stop at nothing to maintain control. As the bodies piled up, so did the tension. Law enforcement stepped up their efforts, but Ian's network of loyalists made it difficult for the authorities to make any significant progress in dismantling his operations. To the outside world, it seemed as though Ian McAteer had become invincible. His empire, built on violence, fear, and manipulation, showed no signs of crumbling. In the years following his conviction, Ian McAteer's life began to take a strange turn. In 2011, a charity event at HMP Shotts, a treadmill marathon to raise funds for the Royal Hospital for Sick Children, was organized, and Ian, along with fellow criminal Jamie Stevenson, participated. It was a curious moment, a stark contrast to the violent, ruthless persona that Ian had cultivated over the years. To some, it was a sign of redemption, a rare act of humanity in an otherwise dark life. To others, it was a cynical attempt to soften his image, a move to distance himself from his bloody past. The media coverage of the event was mixed, with some praising Ian for his charitable gesture, while others saw it as a hollow attempt at public relations. Regardless of public opinion, Ian's participation in the event marked a shift in the way his legacy was viewed. It was no longer just about violence and fear. There were cracks in the armor, moments that suggested there was more to Ian McAteer than the man behind the crimes. Ian McAteer's life is a complex one, marked by contradictions. He is a product of a broken system, a victim of circumstance who rose to power through violence and intimidation. But he is also a symbol of resilience, someone who carved out his own path in a world that offered him little. His rise to power, fueled by his criminal ingenuity and ruthless nature, will forever be remembered as one of the most striking examples of how a man can shape his own fate, no matter how brutal or bloody the path. His legacy is one of fear, but also of mystery. The questions surrounding his life, what drove him, what made him so relentless, will continue to linger. Ian McAteer's name will forever be synonymous with the darkness of Glasgow's underworld. His life serves as a warning. Power gained through fear and violence comes at a terrible price, and it leaves behind a legacy of suffering that stretches far beyond the individual. Lynda Spence, a 27-year-old financial advisor in Glasgow, once epitomized ambition and charm. Outwardly, she managed a thriving mortgage and property business, catering to clients with dreams of luxury and security. Her polished image, marked by visits to upscale hotels, the clink of champagne glasses and stylish cars, belied a life steeped in financial chaos. Overwhelmed by mounting debts and desperate to sustain her glamorous lifestyle, Lynda resorted to deceptive methods. She accepted large deposits from hopeful investors, manipulated documents with alarming ease, and operated under multiple aliases to hide her true financial state. To friends and business partners, she was seen as an entrepreneurial star. Behind closed doors, however, her dealings were rife with fraud and reckless mismanagement that would eventually lead to her undoing. Lynda's ambitions soon pushed her deeper into the murky realm of high-stakes fraud. One particularly audacious scheme promised a staggering return. A mere £85,000 investment was touted to yield a £3.2 million windfall, structured around counterfeit Danish bonds designed to evade taxation. This venture, with its irresistible promise of wealth, lured not only unsuspecting investors, but also dangerous elements from Glasgow's underworld. Among her questionable contacts were individuals with alleged ties to drug trafficking and money laundering, and even an Albanian criminal known as Sokal Zafaj. In a twist that further blurred moral lines, Lynda also agreed to act as an informant for the Scottish Crime and Drug Enforcement Agency. complicating her existence by intertwining legitimate business with covert criminal intrigue. This double life intensified her vulnerability, setting the stage for a catastrophic collision of interests. Amidst her dubious schemes and mounting pressures, Lynda's path crossed with two men whose lives were about to darken irreversibly. Through a mutual associate, Tony Kelly, she was introduced to Colin Coates and Philip Wade, two figures whose turbulent pasts and bitter resentments would soon converge in a deadly act of retribution. Colin Coates, once a promising computer expert in aviation and investment banking, had seen his bright career dimmed by substance abuse and a violent temper. His fall from grace had led him into the realm of organized crime, where his bitterness and thirst for vengeance festered. In contrast, Philip Wade carried the sting of personal financial loss, having trusted Lynda with funds meant for his family during a period of incarceration. Wade's deep-seated resentment soon evolved into a desire for revenge. Together, Coates and Wade saw Lynda not merely as a fraudster, but as an obstacle whose ill-gotten gains needed to be reclaimed by any means necessary. Their alliance, founded on mutual greed and personal vendettas, would ultimately bring about a tragic and irreversible turning point. By early 2011, the noose tightened around Lynda, mounting pressures from creditors, intensifying law enforcement scrutiny, and demands from her criminal partners left her exposed and desperate. On a grim day in April, Coates and Wade intercepted her on the streets of Glasgow. With no room for negotiation and in the absence of any witnesses, they forcibly ushered her into a waiting van, a moment that sealed her fate. The journey from the familiar cityscape to the remote environs of West Kilbride was both abrupt and chilling. Lynda was transported to a nondescript flat where the true horror awaited her. In the attic room of the flat, an atmosphere of foreboding had been meticulously crafted. The space was isolated and stripped of any warmth, transformed into a bleak holding cell. There, Lynda was bound to a leather chair with surgical tape, her arms and waist securely immobilized. Two additional men were posted as guards to ensure she could neither escape nor call for help, turning the room into an oppressive prison that would soon become the stage for her unspeakable torment. For 13 excruciating days, the attic morphed into a chamber of relentless brutality. Every day, Coates and Wade returned with a torture kit containing garden loppers, surgical tape, and even a golf club. Their objective was brutally clear: to force Lynda into revealing the financial secrets behind her fraudulent schemes through physical and psychological domination. The methods they employed were deliberately vicious. Lynda was burned with a hot iron, leaving scars that would serve as lasting reminders of her agony. She endured repeated beatings with the golf club and other implements, and in a series of horrific acts, her captors severed her fingers and crushed her toes. Each brutal act was designed to diminish her spirit and break her will, ensuring that she remained silent. The torture was compounded by the fact that Lynda was forced to remain bound to the chair throughout her captivity. Denied even the most basic human dignity, she was made to relieve herself in the very space where she suffered, a constant and degrading reminder of her helplessness. Adding to her isolation, Coates manipulated her personal communications. Using her mobile and email accounts, he sent misleading messages to her family, fabricating an illusion of safety and normalcy, even as she languished in relentless pain. This added cruelty deepened her isolation, intensifying the despair that accompanied every moment of her ordeal. After 13 days of ceaseless torment, the captors resolved that Lynda's silence had become intolerable. Around April 28, 2011, they reached a chilling decision to end her suffering once and for all. Testimonies from those involved suggest that Colin Coates led the final act of cruelty, reportedly executing Lynda in a manner so brutal that he severed her head before disposing of her remains, in a calculated effort to thwart detection. The method of disposal was executed with meticulous care, ensuring that Lynda Spence's body would remain unrecovered, thus deepening the mystery and horror surrounding her tragic demise. Lynda's sudden disappearance sent shockwaves through her family and the wider community. Her parents, Patricia and Jim, reported her missing on May 13th, launching an urgent search for answers that quickly turned into a desperate quest for truth. As public appeals were broadcast, investigators began to unravel the chilling trail left behind in that isolated attic. Forensic evidence, including traces of blood, fingerprints, and digital data recovered from her phone, combined with brave testimonies from guards who later cooperated with authorities in exchange for reduced sentences. These accounts, despite the absence of Lynda's physical remains, provided irrefutable evidence of the systematic torture and the network of criminals responsible for her abduction and murder. The case eventually reached Glasgow's High Court, where the full extent of the atrocity was laid bare over a rigorous 46-day trial. In February 2013, the jury delivered a verdict that sent ripples of shock through the community. Colin Coates and Philip Wade were found guilty of orchestrating the abduction, prolonged torture, and murder of Lynda Spence. Coates was sentenced to life imprisonment with a mandatory minimum term of 33 years before any possibility of parole, while Wade received a minimum term of 30 years. Lesser accomplices involved in the crime also faced significant prison terms. The severity of these sentences underscored the court's determination to hold the perpetrators accountable for their unspeakable actions. Though the verdict brought legal closure, the emotional and social scars left by Lynda's fate continue to haunt the community. Her case stands as a somber testament to the destructive power of unchecked greed and brutality. In the wake of the trial, Lynda Spence's case ignited widespread debate over vulnerability, exploitation, and the urgent need for enhanced oversight in both financial practices and criminal networks. Community leaders, advocacy groups, and policymakers called for reforms designed to protect individuals from predatory schemes and violent retribution. The tragedy underscored the stark reality that a life built on deception and the lure of easy money can quickly unravel, leaving irreversible damage to families and society as a whole. Her story emerged as a powerful cautionary tale, a reminder that even those who project success and glamour may be entangled in dangerous, self-destructive paths. Years after the trial, the legacy of Lynda Spence remains a subject of painful reflection and intense debate. To some, she symbolizes the perils of living a double life, caught between the glittering allure of wealth and the dangerous entanglements of criminality. Others view her primarily as a tragic victim, ensnared by circumstances that spiraled out of control despite her own missteps. Her fate serves as a lasting lesson about the high cost of deception and the inevitable clash between criminal ambition and the uncompromising demands of justice. The Lynda Spence case endures as one of Scotland's most disturbing criminal episodes, a narrative where ambition, fraud, and relentless brutality converged with devastating consequences. While legal justice was ultimately served, the prolonged torture continued to haunt those left behind. Her story stands as a powerful call to vigilance, urging society to confront the forces of greed and violence head-on so that such dark chapters in human history are never repeated. Colleen Campbell once epitomized the image of a glamorous Manchester gangster's wife. A mother of two, she enjoyed the spoils of organized crime, a BMW and a Mercedes parked outside her Tameside home, foreign holidays, and a newly extended property that announced her status in the neighborhood. But beneath the shiny veneer was a life funded by drug money and violence. Police began circling the Campbells as far back as 2014. Thomas Campbell, Colleen's husband at the time, was a prominent figure in Greater Manchester's cocaine trade. Investigators quickly realized that the couple's income, limited to state benefits, and Colleen's part-time shifts at the retailer Matalan, could not support their lavish spending. More than £100,000 had flowed through their accounts on cars and luxury breaks abroad. By 2019, the couple faced justice. At Manchester Crown Court, both admitted to laundering drug money. Thomas was jailed for 2 years, while Colleen escaped with a 16-month suspended sentence. For a time, it looked as though she had avoided the full weight of the law. That illusion shattered 3 years later, when Thomas Campbell was found murdered in his £350,000 townhouse in Mossley. He had been subjected to a prolonged, sadistic assault. Neighbours later recalled the horror of the discovery. Thomas lay in the hallway, naked except for his socks, his body bearing 61 separate injuries. He had been stabbed, punched, stamped on, and scalded with boiling water. The killers robbed him of drugs, cash, and valuables before leaving him to die. Given Thomas's reputation as a drugs kingpin, detectives initially suspected rivals. Few imagined Colleen herself would be implicated, but suspicions arose when she visited a psychic just days after the murder. She told Thomas's mother that his spirit had been summoned and, chillingly, described the precise nature of his injuries, details that had not been released to the public. Thomas's mother alerted police, and Colleen's carefully constructed facade began to crumble. Investigators uncovered damning evidence. Colleen had been feeding information about her ex-husband's movements to the killers. A phone conversation with one of them was even captured on her home CCTV system. In 2023, after a 5-week trial, Colleen was convicted of manslaughter. The ringleader, Rhys Stephen, was found guilty of murder and handed a life sentence with a minimum term of 37 years. Another associate, Stephen Cleworth, was convicted of manslaughter and conspiracy to rob, receiving a 12-year sentence. Adding to her notoriety, it emerged that just days before Thomas's murder, Colleen had been involved in a violent street brawl in Manchester. During the fight, she attacked a woman with a hammer, an assault that later earned her an additional 18-month sentence. The once glamorous gangster's moll now spends her days in a drab prison cell, her past luxury long gone, her reputation forever tainted by betrayal and violence. When Kellyanne Sweeney entered Manchester Crown Court in 2023, all eyes were on her. With her styled blonde hair, high-end clothes, and confident walk, she looked more like a reality TV star than the partner of a man accused of murdering a child. Yet she was there to support Thomas Cashman, her long-term boyfriend, through one of the most notorious trials in modern British criminal history. Cashman stood accused of killing 9-year-old Olivia Pratt-Corbell in Liverpool. The child had been shot in her own home as she tried to take shelter behind her mother, Cheryl, during a gang-related dispute. The case horrified the nation, but Kellyanne remained steadfast, presenting a glamorous image that contrasted sharply with the harrowing evidence being heard inside the courtroom. The couple had built a comfortable lifestyle in West Derby, Liverpool. Cashman, known simply as Cash on the streets, was earning around £250,000 a year, 7 times the average local salary. He was heavily involved in large-scale cannabis farming and distribution, as well as working as an enforcer for the feared Heighton firm. Kellyanne enjoyed the benefits of his criminal enterprise. She drove a £33,000 Land Rover Discovery Sport, holidayed abroad, and lived in a rented 4-bedroom house worth nearly £500,000. The pair also leased a luxury apartment overlooking the River Mersey. To outsiders, they looked like a prosperous young family, raising their teenage son and young daughter in comfort. But behind the facade was betrayal and violence. During the trial, Kellyanne learned that Cashman had been unfaithful. It was his mistress who eventually reported him to the police, believing he was involved in Olivia's murder. Under questioning, Cashman admitted Kellyanne never asked where his money came from, though he conceded she likely had suspicions about his drug dealing. The jury found Cashman guilty of murder, attempted murder, the wounding of Cheryl Corbell, and firearms offences. He was sentenced to life imprisonment, with no chance of parole until he is in his 70s. For Kellyanne, the verdict was devastating. The glamorous life she once portrayed vanished overnight. Since his arrest, she and her children are believed to have returned to the council estate where she grew up, a dramatic fall from the luxury lifestyle funded by Cashman's crimes. Nicola Cassels has long been whispered about in Scotland's criminal underworld. A mother of three, she is known less for her own crimes than for her close relationships with some of the country's most notorious figures. She once dated John Bonner, who was at the wheel when feared enforcer Gerbil Carroll was driven to his death in 2010. Carroll, an infamous figure within the Daniels crime family, was ambushed and shot dead in an Asda car park in one of Scotland's most shocking gangland hits. Nicola's name has also been linked to Stephen Bonzo Daniel, a powerful figure within the same underworld. Daniel was left permanently scarred after surviving a meat cleaver attack during a long-running feud with the Lyons crime family. Further rumors connect Nicola to Richardson gang member David Toga, cementing her reputation as one of the most connected women in the Scottish criminal scene. Experts describe such patterns of attraction as hybristophilia, a psychological phenomenon where individuals are drawn to partners with criminal or violent tendencies. According to private investigator Alison Harris, it's not the crimes themselves, but the traits of a criminal, power, danger, charisma, that many find exciting. Whether by choice or circumstance, Nicola Cassels remains entwined in Scotland's darkest criminal networks, her life story a reflection of the dangerous allure of gangland figures. In 2013, Jane Park's life changed overnight. At just 17, she became the UK's youngest Euro Millions winner, scooping £1 million on a lucky dip ticket. But rather than providing stability, the windfall set her on a rollercoaster path of cosmetic surgery, tabloid headlines, and dangerous relationships. Flush with cash, Jane underwent multiple procedures, including a £4,500 breast augmentation and a Brazilian butt lift that nearly killed her after she contracted sepsis in 2017. Her looks and her wealth brought attention, not least from figures in the underworld. She became romantically involved with Richardson gang associate David Toga, but when Toga was caught cheating with another gangster's partner, Jane responded by beginning a relationship with that gangster, Mark Webley. In doing so, she completed a notorious partner swap within the Richardson crime circle. Her lifestyle continued to make headlines. She began selling topless content on subscription site OnlyFans and frequently shared updates with her 200,000 Instagram followers, including a trip to Turkey for more surgery in 2023. That same year, tragedy struck. Her boyfriend, Mark Webley, was shot dead outside an Edinburgh pub on New Year's Eve. The killing ended their turbulent relationship in the most violent way possible, marking another dark chapter in Jane's unconventional life. Kelly Bow Green grew up in the shadow of Scotland's most feared crime family. The daughter of Jamie Daniel, she fell in love with Kevin Gerbil Carroll, one of her father's most ruthless enforcers. In 2010, Carroll was gunned down at the age of 29, the victim of a bitter feud with the Lyons crime family. At his funeral, Kelly's grief was plain. She described him as a lover, a friend, my everything. Their shared home, worth £217,000, was seized by authorities, and Kelly was forced to move. Her next house in Glasgow was later firebombed in what was believed to be gang retaliation. Kelly herself later drifted into petty crime. In 2017, she was arrested for shoplifting £800 worth of clothing from H&M. She was spared prison, but ordered to carry out 180 hours of unpaid work. Reports suggested she was part of a shoplifting gang that included her aunt, Annette Daniel, a woman with 22 prior convictions. Kelly's life highlights the cycle of criminality that runs through generations of families within Scotland's gangland. Even when tragedy strikes, the pull of the underworld seems inescapable. Caroline Stevenson is the wife of Jamie Iceman Stevenson, once dubbed the Scottish Tony Soprano. In 2024, Jamie was jailed for 20 years after plotting to smuggle £100 million worth of cocaine into the UK, hidden among shipments of bananas. While her husband serves his sentence, Caroline has cultivated an image of glamour and resilience. She runs an ice cream parlor in Glasgow and maintains a polished presence on social media, regularly showcasing designer clothes and luxury purchases. Her confidence was on display even during her husband's trial. At one point, she posted an image of a banana with laughing emojis, a pointed reference to the smuggling plot that had landed him in court. Caroline represents a new face of the gangster's wife, outwardly respectable, publicly glamorous, and unashamed of her ties to organized crime. With her husband behind bars, she continues to live in comfort, embodying the strange paradox of power and notoriety that comes with life at the top of Scotland's underworld. It was a seemingly ordinary Monday afternoon on May 17, 2025, in East Kilbride, a quiet town just outside Glasgow. Wilson Place, a modest industrial estate housing a variety of small businesses, looked like any other weekday setting. But beneath this calm, tension simmered in Scotland's underworld, waiting to erupt. At approximately 1:25 p.m., chaos shattered the peace. Emergency services received a frantic call reporting a brutal assault at a local garage. Owned by Robert Daniel, a convicted drug dealer and a known figure within Glasgow's feared Daniel crime family, the garage became the site of carnage. Responding officers found two men lying grievously wounded, hacked repeatedly with machetes. The perpetrators were three masked men who had stormed the premises, apparently searching for Daniel himself. Finding no sign of him, their rage was unleashed on the innocent workers. The attackers fled the scene in a blue Audi A5, which was later found burnt out near a nursery centre in Blantyre. Witnesses described seeing them switch vehicles, climbing into a red Vauxhall Astra just moments before the Audi was set ablaze. The attack was chilling evidence of a calculated ambush, a violent chess move in a larger game of power and revenge. This assault was not an isolated incident, but part of a growing pattern of violence tearing at the fabric of Scotland's cities. The once dormant rivalries between gangs had ignited into open warfare, with weapons once unheard of in these circles, machetes, petrol bombs, and high-powered firearms, becoming tools of terror. It painted a grim picture of the escalating brutality sweeping the region. Just 5 days after the East Kilbride massacre, another violent strike rattled Scotland's criminal scene, this time in Edinburgh. On the evening of May 22nd, police were called to Pitcairn Grove following reports of a savage machete attack on David Macmillan, an associate of jailed crime boss Mark Richardson. Richardson, though not officially linked to the Daniel family, was a significant player in Edinburgh's underworld, and his networks often tangled with rivals in Glasgow. Witnesses recounted a grey Land Rover discovery pulling up before at least 4 masked men emerged, descending on Macmillan with brutal ferocity. Left with catastrophic injuries, Macmillan's attack sent a clear message. Scotland's gangland war was no longer simmering quietly, it was erupting. The choice of weaponry, machetes rather than firearms, was deliberate, reflecting a bloody signature meant to terrify rivals and assert dominance. These attacks have shattered community peace, leaving families terrified and police forces scrambling to contain the chaos. In the background, law enforcement agencies have noted a disturbing trend: the globalization of Scotland's gangland. Ties to international drug routes, encrypted messaging networks, and foreign safe havens are increasingly common, complicating efforts to dismantle these criminal organizations. The wounds inflicted on Scotland's streets are symptomatic of a larger, more complex criminal ecosystem. Ross McGill's story begins far from the blood-soaked streets of East Kilbride and Edinburgh, in the quieter suburbs of Lanarkshire. As a teenager, McGill was a football fanatic, a devout Rangers supporter whose loyalty was evident from a young age. His passion soon found an outlet in the ultra scene, first with the Blue Order and later the Union Bears, two of Rangers' most notorious fan groups. By the time Stephen Gerrard managed Rangers at Ibrox, McGill had risen through the ranks, becoming a leading figure among the ultras. Unlike many of his peers who masked themselves, McGill was unafraid to appear publicly, even campaigning openly for fan causes such as safe standing at the stadium. His charisma and leadership were evident. He organized chants, marches, and pyrotechnic displays that made him a recognizable face among supporters. His influence went beyond the terraces. McGill was widely respected among Rangers fans, receiving accolades and even public praise from players and club officials. When he stepped down from his ultra-leadership role in 2021, tributes poured in, recognizing his commitment to the fan movement. What made McGill's transformation intriguing was how he managed to straddle two worlds so seamlessly. On the one hand, he was a figure of passion and loyalty, celebrated in the stadium's stands. On the other, whispers of his criminal ties began to surface, hinting at a darker persona. Behind the fanfare, another side of McGill was emerging, one far darker and far more dangerous. Unknown to many, law enforcement agencies had begun investigating McGill for alleged involvement in organized crime and drug trafficking. His ascent in Glasgow's criminal underworld mirrored his rise in the ultra scene, strategic, fast, and fueled by powerful connections. Reports link McGill to some of Scotland's most notorious crime figures, including James "the Don" White, a crime boss jailed in 2023 for running a massive drug and firearms network, and Lloyd Cross, a former ultra-turned-drug dealer convicted for a multi-million-pound cocaine smuggling operation. McGill's leadership within the Union Bears reportedly brought him into contact with these major players, forming alliances that blurred the line between football fandom and organised crime. What distinguished McGill from many others in Scotland's criminal circles was his calculated approach. He was not just a violent enforcer, but a strategist, adept at navigating complex criminal networks stretching from Scotland to Spain and beyond. This ability made him a rising figure, feared by rivals and law enforcement alike. In early 2022, just months before he was due in court for his suspected criminal activities, McGill disappeared. His sudden vanishing was no accident, but a carefully timed escape as authorities closed in on him amidst the unraveling of the EncroChat network, an international encrypted messaging platform used by criminals. McGill's first refuge was Spain, but he soon relocated to Dubai, a city known for its luxurious lifestyle and lack of an extradition treaty with the UK, an ideal sanctuary for fugitives like him. Using the alias Miami, McGill was photographed driving a white Rolls-Royce, living a life far removed from his humble roots in Lanarkshire. Dubai's glitzy facade masks a darker underworld where exiled gangsters enjoy opulence funded by their illicit empires. For McGill, this new life represents the ultimate transformation, from football ultra capo to fugitive crime lord commanding operations from afar. His presence in Dubai highlights a troubling global trend: criminals exploiting safe havens to evade justice, continuing their illicit activities with impunity. The luxurious lifestyle, five-star hotels, expensive sports cars, exclusive clubs, provides a stark contrast to the violence and fear his empire generates back home. While McGill basks in Dubai's luxury, his criminal empire wreaks havoc thousands of miles away in Scotland. Police investigations reveal a brutal campaign of violence under his direction, with firebombings, machete attacks, and revenge killings shaking Glasgow and Edinburgh. His network, reportedly coordinated through trusted lieutenants in Spain's Costa del Sol, orchestrates attacks by recruiting young foot soldiers and enforcing McGill's will on the streets. Central to this violent machine is a feared enforcement group known as Tamu Junto, believed responsible for some of the most gruesome assaults linked to McGill's rivalries. Over 30 arrests and intensified police raids have gradually exposed the shadowy figure orchestrating the violence. Once a passionate football ultra, McGill now stands accused of controlling lucrative drug routes and aligning himself with hardened criminals, fueling a gangland war that shows no signs of abating. This decentralized command structure makes McGill hard to reach, as he distances himself physically and operationally from the violence, relying on layers of intermediaries and foreign allies to maintain control. The escalation of violence is traced back to a high-stakes drug deal gone awry. A £500,000 cocaine transaction, allegedly paid for with counterfeit banknotes linked to associates of jailed Edinburgh boss Mark Richardson, shattered trust and ignited a violent feud. Though direct proof tying McGill to the botched deal is sparse, such betrayals rarely go unanswered in criminal circles. The fallout triggered retaliatory attacks, shifting power balances and deepening animosities among Scotland's gangs. McGill's ambition is clear: to become Scotland's undisputed underworld kingpin. His ruthless approach and network of enforcers make him a formidable force, rising fast from obscurity to the top table of organized crime. At the core of McGill's violent campaign is Tamu Junto, a brutal enforcement unit believed responsible for a wave of attacks spanning Glasgow to Edinburgh. Their actions include targeted firebombings and savage machete assaults designed to send unmistakable messages to rivals. Operating from his Dubai base, McGill avoids direct involvement in the bloodshed, instead relying on his Spanish allies, criminals entrenched in the Costa del Sol's underworld who recruit and direct foot soldiers. This arrangement shields McGill while ensuring his orders are ruthlessly executed. Despite attempted peace talks led by enforcers loyal to Stephen Bonzo Daniel, a key figure in the Daniel crime family, McGill reportedly rejected all offers, signaling his intention to continue the war. Insiders warn that the violence is far from over. McGill's thirst for power and control over Scotland's criminal landscape shows no limits. The ongoing gangland war threatens to engulf more communities in bloodshed and fear. From a teenage football fanatic chanting in the stands to a fugitive crime boss pulling strings from the deserts of Dubai, Ross McGill's journey is a stark reminder of how passion, ambition, and darkness can intertwine. As Scotland's underworld continues to bleed, the story of Ross McGill is still unfolding. A dangerous saga marked by betrayal, violence, and an unrelenting pursuit of power. Arthur Thompson was born in September 1931 in the industrial district of Springburn, Glasgow. It was an era when the city's streets were filled with the smell of smoke and the echoes of hard labor. Glasgow was a city of industry, where the working class struggled to make ends meet, and crime was a tempting path for those who wanted to escape poverty. Arthur, born into these conditions, quickly learned that the world wasn't kind to those who stood idle. His family was poor, his environment harsh, but from these circumstances, Arthur emerged with one singular ambition: to rise above it all. Arthur didn't waste any time. As a young man, he saw opportunity in the shadows. Money was the key, and it didn't matter how it was earned. His first step into the underworld was as a moneylender, a business that often turned violent. If a person failed to pay their debts, Arthur's punishments were legendary. His reputation for cruelty spread across the city as he was said to crucify debtors, nailing them to floors or doors, as a warning to anyone who might think of crossing him. It was this brutal enforcement of his contracts that built his fearsome name. But the moneylending was just the beginning. Soon, Arthur moved on to more profitable ventures, protection rackets. The business model was simple: pay Arthur for protection, or suffer the consequences. With each new racket, Arthur's power grew. He expanded into bank robberies, heists, and other criminal enterprises, all while carefully keeping a balance between his legitimate dealings and his underground activities. But it was through these violent and daring ventures that Arthur's power and wealth expanded exponentially. As his influence spread, Arthur became untouchable, surrounded by loyal men who would do anything for him. They respected him not just for his violence, but for his cold, calculating intelligence. Arthur was a man who understood power, how to gain it, and most importantly, how to keep it. He had built an empire, and it was only getting stronger. By the time the 1960s arrived, Arthur Thompson was no longer just a feared gangster. He had transformed into something more: a criminal magnate, a businessman with a dark side. The city of Glasgow trembled under his control, and his growing influence was matched only by his wealth. Arthur expanded into legitimate businesses, purchasing pubs, clubs, and other properties. These investments served as a cover for his criminal activities, providing him with a means to launder his illegal gains and expand his network of influence. Arthur wasn't simply about acquiring wealth, he was about consolidating power. He surrounded himself with loyal lieutenants, many of whom had been with him since the early days. These men, hardened by years of working in the underworld, ensured that Arthur's empire was well protected from rivals. But with power came danger. The more he expanded, the more enemies he made. As the Thompson family's influence grew, rival gangs began to form, looking to take a piece of Arthur's territory. But Arthur was always several steps ahead. He was a master of manipulation, using deception, bribery, and intimidation to keep his rivals at bay. While other gangs fought for dominance, Arthur Thompson watched from the sidelines, always poised to strike when the time was right. It was also during this period that Arthur's son, Arthur Jr., known as Fat Boy, entered the family business. In the 1980s, Fat Boy became heavily involved in the family's growing drug trade. The Thompsons were no longer just loan sharks and enforcers. They had fully integrated themselves into the drug market, making vast amounts of money from the illegal substance that was becoming more and more prevalent across the country. One of the defining moments of Arthur's career, and perhaps the one that solidified his place as one of the most feared men in Scotland, was the bombing of 1966. A car bomb was planted under Arthur's vehicle, and in a twist of fate, Arthur survived the blast. His mother-in-law, sitting in the passenger seat, was killed instantly. The assassination attempt on his life only fueled Arthur's resolve for revenge. Arthur immediately suspected two men, Patrick Welsh and James Goldie, both members of the rival Black Hill gang. They were part of the growing resistance against the Thompson family's dominance, and Arthur was not one to take an attack like this lightly. He knew that he had to retaliate, and he did so with chilling efficiency. Arthur tracked down Welsh and Goldie, hunting them down like prey. Driving his own car directly at their van, he forced it off the road. The van hit a lamppost, and both men were killed instantly. Despite the overwhelming evidence, Arthur was never prosecuted. The police could find no witnesses willing to testify against him. In a city where fear ran rampant, no one was brave enough to stand against Arthur Thompson. His reputation for ruthlessness had worked in his favor, and the authorities were powerless to challenge him. His enemies learned a hard lesson that day. Crossing Arthur Thompson meant certain death. But Arthur wasn't the only one in his family who could be violent. His wife Rita also had a fiery temper and a thirst for revenge. In 1969, after the devastating loss of her mother-in-law, Rita took matters into her own hands. She stormed into the Welsh family home, seeking vengeance for her mother's death. Without hesitation, she stabbed Patrick Welsh's widow in the chest. Rita's actions shocked the city and further solidified the Thompson family's brutal reputation. Rita was arrested and sentenced to 3 years in prison, but the damage was already done. The Thompson family's notoriety continued to grow. Violence had become a family affair, and it was clear that no one, not even the women of the family, would back down when it came to protecting their own. The streets of Glasgow now feared not only Arthur, but Rita as well. Arthur Thompson had made so many enemies that attempts on his life became commonplace. But no matter how many times they tried, Arthur kept coming back. In 1985, Arthur was shot in the groin outside his home, the Ponderosa. The attack was brutal, but it didn't kill him. Arthur survived, wounded but alive, and his enemies learned that they hadn't broken him. Then, in 1988, another attempt was made. Arthur was run over by a car and shot at once more, this time suffering a broken leg. Again, he survived. Arthur Thompson had become a symbol of resilience. No matter how many times someone tried to kill him, he remained untouchable. In the criminal underworld, this made him an even more feared figure. Arthur's ability to survive and rise from each attack made him more dangerous. He became a living legend, an untouchable man who defied death time and time again. For his enemies, killing Arthur Thompson was no longer just a goal. It was a nightmare that they couldn't seem to escape. But no one could protect Arthur from the pain of losing his own flesh and blood. On August 18, 1991, Arthur Jr. was shot dead outside the Thompson family home. The young man, who had been groomed to take over the family business, was killed in cold blood. The murder of Arthur Jr. devastated his father. Fat Boy had been everything to Arthur, and his death left a void that would never be filled. A former enforcer for the family, Paul Ferris, was arrested and charged with the murder. However, the trial was a public spectacle. Over 300 witnesses were called to testify, and the trial became the longest and most expensive in Scottish legal history. Despite the overwhelming evidence, Ferris was acquitted. The shock of his acquittal sent ripples through the Thompson family, but it also underscored a harsh reality. Arthur's empire was weakening, and his enemies were finding cracks in his once invincible armor. Even after Ferris's acquittal, the violence didn't stop. On the day of Fat Boy's funeral, the bodies of two of Ferris's friends were discovered, brutally murdered and dumped along the funeral procession route. The bodies of Robert Glover and Joe Hanlon had been left for all to see, a stark message to anyone who thought they could take down the Thompsons. The funeral was a reminder of the Thompson family's legacy, a legacy steeped in bloodshed, revenge, and violence. Yet, the city could feel the winds of change. The world was moving on, and the Thompsons' grip on Glasgow was beginning to slip. Rival gangs began to rise, eager to seize control of the territory that had once belonged solely to Arthur Thompson. On March 13, 1993, Arthur Thompson's life came to an end. He died from a heart attack at the age of 61, after years of living a life that had taken its toll. Arthur Thompson had survived countless assassination attempts, battles, and betrayals, but in the end, it was his heart that gave out. Arthur was buried in Ridley Park Cemetery alongside his son, Arthur Jr., and his mother-in-law. The funeral was attended by many of the city's most notorious criminals, all of whom came to pay their respects to the man who had shaped the city's underworld for decades. But even in death, Arthur's legacy lived on. Arthur's death marked the end of an era. His daughter Margaret had died years earlier from a drug overdose. His son Billy struggled with addiction and was brutally attacked in 2000, though he survived. Billy's life was marked by his father's criminal legacy, but it was a life filled with pain and regret. He eventually succumbed to his addiction in 2017, his life snuffed out in the shadow of the empire his father built. Tracy, Arthur's last remaining child, chose to remain out of the public eye, far from the violent history that had defined her family. She is the final thread to a legacy that is now part of Glasgow's criminal history. But Arthur's influence endures. The Thompsons are a part of Scotland's criminal law, a family whose name will always be tied to violence, power, and control.
On a typical weekday evening in May 2017, Stephen Bonzo Daniel, a 39-year-old father and crime boss, found himself attending the Rangers vs Aberdeen match at Glasgow's Ibrox Stadium. As he headed home to Bishopbriggs later that night, he became aware that an Audi S3 and a Volkswagen Golf were tailing his Skoda Octavia. Concerned for his safety, Daniel accelerated in an attempt to escape. Unfortunately, his efforts proved futile, and he was eventually cornered near the M8 in Port Dundas. This harrowing pursuit culminated in one of the most brutal acts of violence ever witnessed in Glasgow. Despite enduring a brutal assault in broad daylight and providing testimony during the trial, Bonzo surprisingly professed ignorance about the ongoing feud between the Daniel and Lyons families. This surprising claim underscored the belief that the feud would be settled on the streets rather than through legal channels, highlighting the deep-seated animosity between these two prominent Glasgow crime families. Their long-standing conflict has significantly influenced Scotland's criminal landscape, becoming a vendetta marked by violent reprisals, reminiscent of the notorious Kinahan-Hutch feud. The history of this feud includes numerous incidents of shootings, firebombings, and assaults, intertwined with the daily operations of drug trafficking. Far from being an innocent bystander, Bonzo is a key figure, holding the reins as the clan boss of the formidable Daniels, a well-known crime family in Scotland. As the nephew of the late crime kingpin Jamie Daniel, his prominent position made him a conspicuous target for the rival Lyons family. His demise would potentially bring down the entire criminal empire, paving the way for the Lyons to seize greater power in the resulting vacuum. Unsurprisingly, the Lyons family had a vested interest in Bonzo's demise, making him their primary target by any means necessary. Over the years, the Lyons, under the leadership of Stephen Lyons, have cultivated strong connections with the Kinahan cartel, known for supplying cocaine to Scottish gangsters, further complicating the intricate web of alliances and conflicts in the criminal underworld. After narrowly surviving a shooting incident in 2006, Stephen Lyons took refuge in Spain, forming a strategic alliance with the Kinahan syndicate. This influential Irish organization is now considered an ally in the ongoing conflict against the Daniels. Moreover, there are suspicions that Christy Kinahan Sr., a prominent figure within the Kinahan syndicate, had close ties with William Patterson. Patterson is currently serving a life sentence for the murder of Daniels' hitman, Kevin Gerbil Carroll. The gruesome incident involving Carroll saw him shot 13 times while seated in a parked car at a busy supermarket in 2010. Following the killing, Patterson fled to Spain but was apprehended in Madrid in 2014. This connection underscores the complex network of relationships and alliances within the criminal landscape, revealing the intricate interplay between different factions in this ongoing and intense feud. Amidst the ongoing feud, numerous lives have been tragically lost on both sides. In a grim turn of events, it was Bonzo's fate on an ordinary Wednesday night in 2017. As he traversed through Milton, Glasgow, en route to his family home in Bishopbriggs, disaster struck. His car was forcefully rammed by a Volkswagen Golf, sparking a frantic attempt to escape the imminent danger. Fearing for his life, Bonzo accelerated to speeds of up to 100 miles per hour, with an Audi S3 joining the pursuit and 2 cars tailing him. The chase unfolded through the Possil area, captured in dramatic CCTV footage that revealed Bonzo's car being rammed during the midnight chase through the north of Glasgow. The pursuit continued onto Cradle Road in Port Dundas, concluding tragically at the M8 on-ramp after another collision with the Audi. Cornered and besieged, Bonzo faced a horrifying attack. The occupants of the Audi unleashed relentless brutality, wielding a machete, cleaver, and hammer in a series of strikes that inflicted severe injuries. Left for dead, Bonzo was discovered by the police at the scene. His injuries were so grave that initial impressions led officers to believe he had been shot in the face. He was swiftly rushed to the nearby Glasgow Royal Infirmary, where doctors worked tirelessly to save his life and reconstruct his face. Later revelations suggested that Daniel's survival might have hinged on the attack occurring in proximity to a hospital and the fortuitous presence of a top-class surgeon on duty that fateful night. After enduring extensive hours of surgery aimed at reconstructing his face, Bonzo spent weeks in the hospital, marked permanently by the scars of the brutal attack. Upon his discharge, his residence was placed under constant police protection to thwart any further attempts on his life. Although he claimed to have no recollection of the attack itself, only remembering his car hitting a pole, the investigation unearthed crucial evidence. The Audi S3, employed in the chase, was later abandoned and set ablaze in an effort to erase any traces of evidence. However, the blood-stained machete used in the assault was inadvertently left behind on the rear seat. Subsequently, investigators discovered callous WhatsApp messages discussing the attempted murder, posted by the assailants just hours after the incident. As the investigation progressed, it was revealed that the attackers had surreptitiously installed a tracking device on Bonzo's Skoda while he was at Ibrox Stadium the previous evening. This innovative device, the first of its kind used in Scotland, had been sourced from a Manchester-based company. The tracking device allowed authorities to trace Bonzo to the Milton area of the city, shedding light on the intricate planning and execution of the violent attack. This evidence played a crucial role in identifying those responsible and connecting 6 men to the attack. These individuals, later dubbed the Cleaver Gang, were reportedly affiliated with the Lyons, contributing to a wave of violence triggered by the shooting of Lyons associate Ross Monaghan in 2017. Monaghan, once the primary suspect in the killing of Kevin Gerbil Carroll, had been acquitted due to a lack of evidence. Bonzo's attempted hit marked the culmination of a series of 5 assaults within a 15-month period. All 5 men targeted in these attacks, including Bonzo, were associated with the Daniel family. Tracking devices were consistently used to monitor these individuals. The 6 members of the Cleaver Gang faced trial at the High Court in Glasgow in January 2019, charged with multiple attempted murder allegations. According to a judge, their intent was to turn Glasgow into a war zone. Security measures during the proceedings were stringent, featuring armed police guarding the premises and thorough searches of individuals entering. A police escort accompanied the prison van transporting the 6 accused, ensuring their safe transit to and from the court on a daily basis. This heightened security underscored the gravity of the charges and the potential for further violence, emphasizing the significance of the trial in addressing the ongoing conflict between the Daniel and Lyons families. The jury learned that the orchestrated attacks were part of a long-standing feud between two rival criminal families in Glasgow, the Lyons and the Daniels. Reports indicated that the defendants, all associated with the Lyons, were specifically targeting individuals linked to the Daniel family. However, Bonzo presented a different narrative, vehemently denying any personal enemies or animosity between him and the Lyons. It became evident that both the Lyons and Daniels preferred to mete out their own justice through acts of violence, rather than relying on legal channels. Additionally, Bonzo refuted allegations of his family's involvement in organized crime. The 6 men, Brian Ferguson, Andrew Gallagher, Robert Pickett, John Hardy, Andrew Sinclair, and Peter Bain, were ultimately found guilty of conspiracy to commit murder after a 14-week trial. The extensive proceedings reportedly cost taxpayers £6 million. The subsequent month saw all the men sentenced to jail for the attacks on Bonzo and the 4 other victims, collectively receiving a total of 104 years in prison. Following the verdict, the lead detective overseeing the investigation expressed relief that innocent civilians had miraculously remained unharmed throughout the period of appalling violence that had gripped the Glasgow region.
Tam McGraw was born in 1952 in the small village of Lennoxtown, situated on the outskirts of Glasgow. Growing up in a working-class family, Tam experienced poverty firsthand, and early on, he learned that survival meant seizing opportunities in ways others might consider immoral. His father, a factory worker, was often absent due to long shifts, and his mother struggled to keep the family afloat. From a young age, Tam had a chip on his shoulder, feeling the weight of his family's struggles. In his early years, Tam showed no interest in education. His world was the streets, where he quickly picked up the tricks of the trade. He was known to his peers as a petty thief, taking small items from the shops, nicking bikes, and causing mischief. He was always quick on his feet, able to run away before anyone had a chance to catch him. While other kids played football or hung out in the park, Tam was already planning his next crime. By the time he reached his teenage years, Tam had become involved in more serious criminal activity. He started hanging around with older boys, joining the local gang. At first, it was all about small-time robberies, stealing cars and breaking into homes. But it didn't take long for him to gain a reputation as someone who could handle bigger jobs. He was fearless, often willing to take risks that others would balk at. He didn't shy away from violence if it meant getting what he wanted. It was during this period that he became entangled with the Bar L gang, one of Glasgow's most notorious criminal organizations. The gang was involved in everything from robberies and extortion to drugs and prostitution. The gang leaders saw potential in Tam, recognizing his cunning and ambition. They quickly took him under their wing, showing him the ropes of the criminal underworld and giving him access to a network that would change the trajectory of his life. By the 1980s, Tam had made a name for himself in Glasgow's criminal world. He was no longer just a petty thief or a member of a gang. He was becoming a key player in the underworld, with connections that stretched across Scotland and beyond. He began to focus on more profitable criminal enterprises, specifically the burgeoning heroin trade that was sweeping through the UK. Glasgow became one of the major hubs for drug trafficking, and Tam was positioned perfectly to exploit the opportunity. Tam's first big break came when he made a deal with a notorious drug lord who was bringing heroin into the country. With his connections and his growing reputation, Tam was able to set up a network that smuggled drugs into Scotland. He knew the ins and outs of the city's docks, the best routes to avoid police detection, and the locations where the shipments could be hidden. His operation quickly expanded, and soon he had a monopoly on the heroin trade in Glasgow. Tam's wealth grew exponentially as he began to supply heroin to various parts of the city. He didn't just sell to small-time dealers, he had the connections to supply large quantities to major distributors. His empire spread across the city, and with each deal, he became more powerful. He expanded into legitimate businesses, buying up nightclubs, bars, and even a fleet of ice cream vans, which were used as a cover for his illicit operations. But with power came the inevitable threat of rivals. Tam had always been ambitious, and as his empire grew, so did the number of people who wanted to take him down. He was known to use intimidation, violence, and even murder to keep his business running smoothly. The streets of Glasgow were filled with gang wars, and Tam was right in the middle of them. It was during this time that the ice cream wars broke out, a bloody turf war between rival criminal groups fighting for control of the ice cream van trade in the city. What started as a simple business venture quickly escalated into full-scale violence. The ice cream vans were no longer just a way to sell ice cream. They were the perfect cover for moving drugs and money. Tam's gang was involved in several turf wars with rival groups, each one trying to seize control of the lucrative ice cream routes. The ice cream wars were infamous for the brutal violence that accompanied them. Drive-by shootings, stabbings, and bombings became commonplace as rival factions fought for control of Glasgow's streets. Tam was no stranger to the bloodshed, having been involved in numerous violent confrontations. He wasn't afraid to get his hands dirty, and it was well known that he could take down anyone who crossed him. In the early stages of the war, Tam's rivals underestimated his ruthlessness. They thought he was just another gangster trying to make a name for himself, but Tam had other plans. He built alliances with key players in the underworld, including Johnny Mad Dog Adair, a notorious figure in Northern Ireland's criminal scene. Together, they strengthened their grip on the city, but it wasn't long before their alliance would fall apart, leading to one of the most infamous feuds in Scottish criminal history. Despite the ongoing violence and the increasing risk of law enforcement cracking down, Tam's criminal empire continued to thrive. He had his fingers in every pie: drugs, gambling, extortion, and even prostitution. As the leader of his gang, he operated with a sense of cold efficiency, maintaining control over the city through sheer force of will. Tam's rise to power wasn't without its challenges. One of the most significant and consequential feuds of his life was with Johnny Mad Dog Adair, a loyalist from Northern Ireland. The two men initially formed a partnership based on mutual benefit. Adair, known for his violent and unpredictable nature, was deeply involved in the smuggling of heroin, and together with McGraw, they established a network moving large quantities of the drug across the UK. However, the alliance between McGraw and Adair soured when Tam allegedly stole a shipment of heroin worth a fortune from Adair. This betrayal would ignite a bitter and long-lasting rivalry between the two men. Adair, known for his ruthless reputation, felt deeply insulted by the theft and the challenge to his authority. Tam's decision to double-cross him sent shockwaves through the criminal underworld, leading to open conflict between the two factions. What had once been a mutually beneficial relationship rapidly descended into one of the most infamous feuds in Scotland's criminal history. Both men were involved in a number of violent confrontations, each one more brutal than the last. Tam and Adair's rivalry didn't just stay between the two of them. It extended to their respective gangs, resulting in even more bloodshed on the streets of Glasgow. As the years wore on, Tam and Adair's feud remained a defining part of their lives. Each tried to outmaneuver the other in a dangerous game of one-upmanship, but the betrayal that Tam orchestrated was something that Adair never forgot. Even though the two men were on opposite sides, their personal war set the stage for the next stage in Tam's journey, the brutal and unforgiving world of rivalries, betrayal, and survival in the unforgiving world of Glasgow's criminal underworld. One of the most notable was Paul Ferris, a former associate turned bitter enemy. Ferris accused Tam of betraying him and using him as a pawn in his criminal empire. The animosity between them reached new heights when Ferris alleged that Tam had informed the police about his illegal activities, leading to his arrest. Ferris, embittered by his time in prison, wasted no time in writing about Tam in his memoirs, painting him as a traitor and a coward. But Tam didn't back down. Despite being constantly under fire from rivals and former associates, he remained a dominant figure in the Glasgow underworld. His ability to survive multiple assassination attempts only added to his mystique. He was a man who had outlasted many others, but as the years wore on, the toll of his violent lifestyle began to take its toll. By the late 1990s, Tam's empire was beginning to unravel. The constant pressure from rivals, the police, and the toll on his personal life weighed heavily on him. His health began to decline, and he suffered from various ailments. Despite his reputation for invincibility, Tam's body was starting to show the effects of a lifetime spent in the underworld. In 1998, Tam was arrested as part of a major drug trafficking investigation. The charges against him were serious, and for a time, it seemed like his empire was coming to an end. However, Tam's connections and wealth allowed him to avoid a lengthy prison sentence. He fought the charges in court, using every resource at his disposal to clear his name. The case eventually collapsed, and Tam was released. Despite his legal victory, Tam's health continued to deteriorate. He suffered a major heart attack in 2002, though he survived the incident. It was a wake-up call for him, but it didn't slow him down. He continued to run his operations, though his influence had started to wane. The once feared gangster was now a shadow of his former self. On March 8, 2003, Tam McGraw passed away from a fatal heart attack. At the age of 55, his body could no longer withstand the toll of his violent lifestyle. He had survived numerous assassination attempts, arrests, and betrayals, but in the end, it was his health that claimed him. His death marked the end of an era in Glasgow's criminal world. Tam's funeral was a somber affair, attended by many from the criminal underworld. Some mourned his passing, while others saw it as the end of a tyrant's reign. The city of Glasgow, once under Tam's control, seemed to move on quickly, though his name would remain a fixture in the lore of Scottish crime. Though Tam McGraw is gone, his legacy lives on in the stories told by those who knew him. Some remember him as a ruthless criminal mastermind, while others view him as a tragic figure, someone who had the potential to be more, but chose the path of crime. His feuds, betrayals, and the violence that surrounded him left a lasting imprint on Glasgow's criminal landscape. He was a man who built an empire with his own hands, but in the end, it was that empire that led to his downfall. Tam's life serves as a cautionary tale of the dangers of ambition, betrayal, and the relentless pursuit of power. Though his empire crumbled after his death, the legend of Tam McGraw, the licensee, will never be forgotten. His name still echoes through the streets of Glasgow, a reminder of a man who rose from nothing and ruled the underworld for decades. Paul John Ferris was born on November 10, 1963, in the Black Hill district of Glasgow, Scotland, to a Protestant father and a Catholic mother. Growing up in a divided city, Ferris's early life was marked by sectarian tensions and family strife. He was the youngest of 6 children, with one older brother, Billy, and 4 sisters, Carroll, Kath, Janet, and Maureen. Ferris's life was troubled from the outset. As a young boy, he was bullied by members of a local criminal family, the Welshes, an experience that profoundly affected him. The bullying, combined with his turbulent home life, is thought to have contributed to the development of the skin condition psoriasis, which would remain a part of his life throughout adulthood. From an early age, Ferris became acquainted with Glasgow's gangland figures, including Ian McAteer, with whom he shared a childhood. Despite his family's hardships, Ferris's potential as a criminal figure was apparent early on. By the time he was a teenager, he had already begun to engage in criminal activities, starting with a series of revenge knife attacks against the Welsh brothers. These violent acts marked the beginning of his descent into Glasgow's underworld. At the age of 17, Ferris was arrested for assault and robbery and sent to Long Rigand Remand Centre. His time there was only the beginning of a life intertwined with the criminal justice system. While awaiting trial, Ferris made his first escape attempt, fleeing from police after a car chase. His car contained weapons, including a shotgun and knives, and he was eventually captured and returned to prison. Ferris's rise within Glasgow's criminal circles began when he attracted the attention of Arthur Thompson, a powerful and feared figure in the city's criminal underworld. Thompson, known as the Godfather, had an empire built on a network of enforcers, debt collectors, and criminals who carried out various illegal activities. At the age of 19, Ferris became an enforcer for Thompson, tasked with collecting debts and engaging in acts of extreme violence. Ferris was known for his ruthlessness, committing stabbings, slashings, and kneecappings to enforce the Thompson family's will. He quickly earned a reputation for being one of the most violent men in Glasgow, and his fearsome demeanor only solidified his position within the criminal ranks. In the early 1980s, Ferris was arrested after an attempted shooting incident involving Willie Gibson and his relatives. While the shooting left one man injured, Ferris was acquitted at trial, with the verdict being not proven. Despite this legal victory, Ferris continued his violent work as an enforcer for Thompson. It was clear that his future was tied to the criminal enterprise, and he would stop at nothing to maintain his position within it. However, Ferris's involvement in crime wasn't limited to working for Thompson. He was also arrested multiple times for various offenses, including the possession of offensive weapons. In one particular incident, police discovered a pickaxe handle and knives in his car, resulting in another charge for Ferris. Despite these arrests, Ferris's criminal activity continued unabated, as he used his connections to move within Glasgow's underworld, avoiding significant jail time for many of his crimes. Ferris's criminal career took a turn in 1984 when he was convicted of weapons possession and sentenced to prison. While in prison, he began to reflect on his life choices and the nature of his involvement with the Thompson family. In 1991, his life would take another dramatic shift, following the murder of Arthur Thompson Jr., the son of his former mentor and boss. The murder of Arthur Jr. occurred on August 18, 1991, when he was shot outside his home. Ferris was immediately arrested and charged with the murder, along with his associates Robert Glover and Joe Bananas Hanlon, both of whom were also suspects in the murder. It was widely believed that Ferris had been involved in a feud with the Thompson family, although Ferris himself would later deny any involvement. The subsequent trial, which was the longest and most expensive in Scottish history at the time, spanned over 54 days and involved more than 300 witnesses. Despite the overwhelming attention surrounding the case, Ferris was acquitted of all charges. His acquittal was a significant victory for Ferris, as it confirmed his belief that he had been betrayed by the Thompsons, with whom he had once had a close and powerful relationship. After his acquittal, Ferris returned to Glasgow, but his criminal activities did not stop. He established a car dealership named Jagger Autos and later became a consultant for Premier Security, a firm with reported annual earnings of £6.2 million. However, Ferris's criminal ties remained strong. His connections in the underworld included figures such as Paul Massey and Rab Carruthers, both of whom were involved in organized crime across the United Kingdom. While Ferris sought to distance himself from a life of crime by starting legitimate businesses, his actions continued to draw the attention of the police. In 1993, Ferris's brother Billy escaped from a prison escort while visiting their sick father. Billy Ferris was eventually captured in Blackpool and became one of the 6 most wanted men in Britain. Ferris himself accused the police of having a vendetta against his family, especially after Billy was refused permission to attend their father's funeral. Despite these ongoing troubles, Ferris's rise to prominence in Glasgow's criminal circles continued. He remained a figure of great power and influence, with a reputation that was both feared and respected. In 1997, Ferris was arrested in London, following a 2-year surveillance operation by MI5 and Special Branch. At his trial in 1998, Ferris was convicted on multiple charges, including conspiracy to sell or transfer prohibited weapons, conspiracy to deal in firearms, and possession of explosives. Ferris was sentenced to 10 years in prison, a sentence that was later reduced to 7 years on appeal. While in prison, Ferris co-authored his autobiography, The Ferris Conspiracy, with journalist Reg McKay. The book sold over 20,000 copies, making Ferris a well-known figure even while incarcerated. His notoriety continued to grow as he shared more details about his criminal life, including his violent past and the betrayals he had suffered. Ferris's time in prison was not without incident. He was involved in a knife fight with rival gangster Tam McGraw, which led to further legal complications. However, Ferris was eventually released from prison in 2002, pledging to leave behind his criminal life. Upon his release, Ferris attempted to transition away from his life of crime by entering the legitimate business world. He started a company called Frontline Security, though it was quickly embroiled in controversy. In 2004, the company faced criticism after it was reported that they had been hired to guard the Rose Park nursing home, where 14 elderly pensioners had died in a fire. Later that year, the company was also found to have secured a contract to protect speed cameras on the M8 motorway, drawing scorn from both the public and the police. Despite the controversy surrounding his business ventures, Ferris continued to pursue a career as an author. In 2001, his first book, The Ferris Conspiracy, was published while he was still in prison. The book offered an in-depth look at his life and his role in Glasgow's criminal underworld. In the years that followed, Ferris published several more books, including Deadly Divisions, 2002, Vendetta, 2005, and Villains, 2006. These books further cemented his status as a notorious figure in both the criminal world and the literary scene. Ferris's newfound celebrity status did not sit well with some law enforcement officials, who accused him of attempting to glamorize his criminal past. In 2005, police in Edinburgh began investigating Ferris over concerns that he was trying to invest in the taxi trade. A month later, news surfaced of a planned film based on Ferris's life, starring Scottish actor Martin Compston as Ferris and Oasis singer Liam Gallagher as Tam McGraw. In 2013, Ferris's life story was brought to the big screen in the film The Wee Man, which chronicled his rise through Glasgow's underworld. The film, starring Martin Compston as Ferris and John Hannah as his rival Tam McGraw, was released to mixed reviews, but attracted significant attention, further solidifying Ferris's status as one of Scotland's most infamous criminals. In 2018, Ferris released his latest book, Unfinished Business, which he co-wrote with authors Steve Wraith and Stu Wheatman. The book served as a reflection on Ferris's turbulent life and career, recounting his experiences as a criminal, his time in prison, and his attempts to reinvent himself as an author and businessman. Although Ferris has distanced himself from his past, his legacy as a feared enforcer and notorious figure in Glasgow's criminal history remains firmly intact. The story of Paul Ferris is one of violence, betrayal, and survival, a testament to the resilience of a man who rose from the streets of Glasgow to become one of the most recognized figures in Scotland's criminal history.
They have terrorised Glasgow for a generation, locked in a bloody war over territory, drugs and money. The Lyons and the Daniels rule by fear, intimidation and violence.
Kevin Gerbil Carroll, among Scotland's most infamous criminals, rose as a feared enforcer for Glasgow's Daniel crime family. His brutal tactics, like the unsettling alien abduction, left victims unable to recall the trauma. Despite his notoriety, Carroll faced unexpected threats that spiraled his life out of control. Born August 24, 1980, at Glasgow's Stob Hill Hospital, Carroll endured childhood bullying from Stephen and Edward Jr. Lyons, key figures in Glasgow's criminal underworld. Amidst rivalries with the Lyons and Daniel crime families, Carroll's association deepened with sons of Jamie Daniel, Robert Daniel, and Francis Green, who shaped his path into crime. His involvement intensified as tensions between the Daniel and Lyons factions brewed. By his teens, Carroll's criminal record was established, landing him a 3-month sentence for car theft at 19. In his mid-20s, Kevin transitioned to a more profitable criminal career with the Daniel family, specializing in drug trafficking and enforcement. Known for his ruthless tactics, Kevin pioneered the alien abduction method of attack. As head enforcer, he handled rivalries aggressively, often leading nighttime raids on targets' homes, posing as police to abduct and transport victims to undisclosed locations. There, using brutal means, Kevin and his crew subjected victims to extreme physical and psychological torture, employing various power tools. Victims, often found later disoriented and unclothed, frequently could not recall the traumatic events due to fear or psychological trauma, hence coining the term alien abduction. Kevin was deeply entrenched in drug dealing with a distinctive modus operandi. He sold cocaine to known dealers and then orchestrated thefts to reclaim both the drugs and the money. In one notable incident, he sold 5 kilos of cocaine to a dealer, only to later ambush and reclaim the drugs. Another instance showcased Kevin's opportunism when he sought a specific weapon, a stolen SA-80 rifle with advanced accessories. Competing with the Lyons family, who had already placed a deposit, Kevin resorted to extreme measures, abducting and intimidating the soldier selling the rifle to secure both the weapon and the deposit. Amidst escalating tensions between the Lyons and Daniel crime families in northern Glasgow, Lyons in Milton and Daniels in Possil, Kevin found himself embroiled, leveraging his notoriety in the conflict. In 1992, Eddie Lyons Sr., the head of the Lyons family, was given the disused Churnside School in Milton for a community project. However, his real interest was in expanding his criminal empire. 3 years later, in 1995, while using the school as his headquarters, Eddie received £1.4 million in public funding. This might seem strange, but at the time, Eddie was putting up a convincing front of helping his local communities. Besides the usual conflicts over greed and control of drug territory, another reason for the feud's escalation emerged. In the summer of 2001, tensions soared when a large stash of the Daniels cocaine was stolen from a house in Milton Lyons territory. The stolen stash was then sold to the Lyons. The Lyons saw the Daniels move as an incursion into their market. This was the last straw for the Daniels, and Kevin, with his own grudge to bear, was more than eager to assist the Daniel family in the brewing conflict. Given Kevin's violent nature and the brewing feud between the two families, it's not surprising that there were people out for revenge. The first attempt on Kevin's life occurred in 2003, right outside his mother's home. Though he was injured, the attack ultimately failed to kill him. The second attack, 3 years later in 2006, was far less subtle. Kevin and his associate Ross Sherlock were walking in Bishopbriggs when they were suddenly ambushed in a drive-by shooting. Kevin was hit in the stomach but survived once again. This second attack was perhaps understandable given the circumstances. Allegedly, Kevin and Ross had vandalized a gravestone in Bishopbriggs belonging to Gary Lyons, the son of Eddie Lyons Sr., who had died of leukemia at the age of 8 in 1991. To make matters worse, the attack happened the day before Gary's relatives were due to visit the grave to mark his birthday. The Lyons family was outraged, as targeting the grave of an innocent child was a new low. If the Daniels were willing to stoop so low, the Lyons feared what else they might target. Furious, the Lyons sought immediate revenge and attempted to eliminate Kevin and Ross. From that point forward, the conflict became a tit-for-tat war. When one gang member was attacked, the opposing family would swiftly retaliate. It wasn't long after the failed hit on Kevin that the next attack occurred. Just 3 weeks later, on December 6, 2006, a highly public and ruthless incident unfolded. Two hitmen from the Daniels, Raymond Anderson and James McDonald, stormed into the showroom of Apple Row Motors. This dealership was owned by David Lyons, the brother of Eddie Lyons Sr. In a brazen attack, the hitmen opened fire within minutes. Michael Lyons, David's 21-year-old nephew, was fatally wounded, while his cousin Stephen and several others were severely injured. Anderson and McDonald were swiftly apprehended and later sentenced to 35 years in prison for their crime. Despite the arrests, it was clear the Lyons would retaliate. Over the next 4 years, the feud intensified. Then on January 13, 2010, a pivotal event occurred. Kevin had arranged a meeting at the Asda car park in Robroyston, Glasgow. Sitting in the back seat of a black Audi A3 with two unarmed associates in the front, Kevin was unusually relaxed and unprepared for trouble. Suddenly, at 1:23 p.m., a Volkswagen Golf screeched to a halt, blocking the Audi in the busy car park. Two men emerged from the Volkswagen and immediately opened fire on the Audi. Kevin's two associates in the front swiftly exited the car and fled, leaving Kevin vulnerable. He tragically succumbed to his injuries on the spot. Kevin was struck by at least 5 bullets out of the 13 fired at the car. One of those bullets fatally hit him in the head, ending his life. Despite the perception that the hit seemed to last for hours, the entire event unfolded in just 25 seconds.
As armed police and onlookers surround the car in which Kevin Carroll was
killed. Said she saw a hooded man holding a Clint Eastwood-style gun. There were lots of people around, and Mrs. Busby then recalled how she could hear a baby crying.
A shopper thought she was caught up in another Dunblane massacre when she heard gunfire in a supermarket car park.
The daylight execution of Kevin Carroll remains one of Glasgow's most infamous gangland hits. Known for his paranoia, Kevin often wore bulletproof vests and carried weapons for protection. However, on that fateful day, with numerous people seeking his demise, no amount of caution could save him. After 2 previous failed attempts on his life, the third proved fatal. Yet something about the incident felt unsettling. After months of investigation, the police arrested Ross Monaghan on July 30th, 2010. He was a well-known associate of the Lyons and suspected to be the mastermind behind Kevin's assassination. However, the trial against him collapsed in 2012, and Ross Monaghan was not convicted. The judge ruled that there was insufficient evidence to sustain a guilty verdict. The entire case hinged on a single particle of firearms discharge residue found on a jacket, seized during a raid on Monaghan's home. At the time, forensic expert Alison Colley, working for the Scottish Police Authority, initially suggested the residue matched that found at the crime scene. However, during the trial, she clarified that the particle was too minuscule to draw definitive scientific conclusions. She admitted that she had conducted tests she wouldn't normally perform and was under pressure from detectives. Moreover, she was unaware that firearm officers had been involved in the search of Monaghan's house, posing a risk of cross-contamination. Due to these factors, the evidence was deemed inadmissible in court. As a result, Ross Monaghan walked away a free man, as there was not enough proof to link him to Kevin Carroll's assassination. If you find yourself questioning the discrepancies in the story, you're not alone. How did the Lyons men manage to ambush Kevin, and why was he so unprepared? If you suspect there's something more sinister at play, you may be onto something. After Ross Monaghan's trial concluded, revelations surfaced, suggesting a deeper, more troubling narrative. It was uncovered that an insider had been feeding the Lyons family confidential surveillance details. Disgraced former officer Derek MacLeod. Derek had been employed by the Lothian and Borders Police Force. Unbeknownst to his colleagues, he was actively collaborating with the Lyons gang. His information provided the family with crucial intelligence on Kevin and his associates, enabling them to evade police scrutiny. Once Derek's treachery was exposed, authorities raided his home. During the search, they discovered 85 kilograms of marijuana under his stairs and a cannabis farm in his garage. It appeared Derek had been assisted by the crime family in distributing his illicit products. As a consequence of his corruption, Derek MacLeod was sentenced to 2 years and 3 months for drug offenses and an additional 16 months for breaching the Official Secrets Act. His actions not only compromised law enforcement efforts, but also played a significant role in the events leading to Kevin Carroll's demise. However, if you're still puzzled by the inconsistencies surrounding Kevin's assassination, another theory suggests the Daniels themselves ordered the hit. This speculation may seem far-fetched, given Kevin's close ties with the Daniels. Yet sources within the Daniels family indicate otherwise. According to these sources, the bosses believed Kevin had become uncontrollable and was causing more trouble than he was worth. Shockingly, during his tenure with the Daniels, Kevin married Kelly Bowe, Jamie Daniels' daughter, and they had 2 children together. Their relationship, however, was turbulent and often described as tumultuous. Kevin was known to have physically abused Kelly Bowe on multiple occasions, leaving her severely bruised. He also frequently disparaged her character publicly. Kevin's behavior wasn't limited to his wife. He also began to disrespect Jamie Daniel himself. There were instances where Kevin threatened Jamie and used derogatory and offensive language to describe him, including terms like fat gypsy and other colorful insults. These actions reportedly strained his relationship with the Daniels family. This deteriorating relationship and Kevin's erratic behavior may have led the Daniels to view him as a liability rather than an asset, prompting them to sanction his assassination despite their previous association. These kinds of insults don't go unnoticed in a crime family, especially when directed at its leader. What raised suspicions, particularly among Kevin's loyalists, was the circumstances surrounding his assassination. They found it hard to believe that Kevin would attend a meeting unprepared and off guard, unless he believed he was meeting someone he knew well. Another reason many suspected an inside job was the reaction of Kevin's associates. Instead of defending him, they fled the scene when the attack occurred. Remarkably, the assailants didn't pursue them. After the attackers left, Kevin's associates returned to the car and contacted Francis Fraggle Green, Jamie Daniels' brother and a longtime friend of Kevin's. When Francis arrived, he entered the car and appeared to remove something from Kevin before departing, managing to arrive before the police, which struck many as suspicious. In 2015, William Patterson was convicted for his role in Kevin's assassination. Despite this, the feud between the Daniel and Lyons families continues unabated, both vying for dominance in Glasgow's underworld. Given the long-standing animosity between these families, it seems unlikely that their feud will cease anytime soon.
It was a chilly December evening in 2016 when a year-long undercover operation reached a critical juncture. Around 6 p.m, 2 officers were conducting surveillance on a silver Toyota Yaris on Church Street in Baillieston, located on Glasgow's eastern outskirts. Their attention was drawn to Mark Richardson, an Edinburgh-based gangster, as he entered a black Mini Cooper. Richardson had been identified as a central figure in a criminal enterprise reportedly generating over £100 million annually, with connections spanning from Glasgow's housing schemes to Brazil. The Yaris was one of several vehicles being monitored as part of a comprehensive investigation into the gang's activities. Sensing a critical moment, the officers initiated a pursuit of the Mini Cooper. The chase concluded with Richardson's arrest by the Organised Crime and Counter-Terrorism Unit. This single apprehension marked the beginning of the end for one of Scotland's most formidable and influential crime syndicates. Born in 1982, Mark Richardson grew up in the challenging working-class areas of Glasgow. In these neighbourhoods, loyalty was highly valued, and violence, particularly involving knives, was a grim reality. Although born in Edinburgh, it was in Glasgow that Richardson came of age, following in his father's footsteps and entering the world of gang culture at an early age. By his late teens, during a period when Glasgow's streets were rife with crime like shoplifting, car thefts and gang clashes, Mark saw more than just disorder. He saw opportunity. Driven to overcome his circumstances, he became determined to acquire wealth through any available means. He had already established a local reputation by the age of 15. By 19, he was fully immersed in a criminal lifestyle. Alongside his father, Mark Richardson Sr. and Jr. began selling cocaine in Edinburgh. However, this venture quickly attracted police attention. A series of early morning raids led to the discovery of £30,000 in cash and cocaine, with a street value estimated at £112,000. Mark Richardson and his father were arrested. A third individual, Richard Bonner, who had allowed his house to be used as a stash location, was also arrested and sentenced to 3 years in prison. In 2005, Mark Jr., then just 19, received a sentence of 32 months behind bars, while his father was given 4.5 years. Following his release from prison, Mark Richardson swiftly returned to the drug trade. He quickly re-established himself, forging connections with organised crime groups in Glasgow and Liverpool to facilitate the flow of large quantities of cocaine into Edinburgh. Richardson rose to become the leader of the Inch Cocaine Network, one of the most powerful drug gangs in the city at the time. Working closely with his trusted associate, David Toker, a former soldier who was later imprisoned for 5 years and 3 months for possessing £450,000 worth of cocaine, the pair built a ruthless operation. From their base in South Edinburgh, Richardson commanded a network of hardened young criminals who controlled a significant portion of the city's cocaine supply. The Inch Gang's expansion triggered a violent turf war, linking them to a series of shootings across the capital as tensions escalated with rival gangs. Mark Richardson Jr.'s time in prison unknowingly marked a pivotal turning point in his criminal trajectory. His growing prominence had caught the attention of Glasgow's most notorious crime syndicate, the Daniels. Led by the feared and influential Jamie Daniel, operating primarily out of Postle Park in North Glasgow, the Daniels were deeply involved in drug trafficking, violence, intimidation, money laundering, and international smuggling routes. For the Daniels, Richardson's reputation for both loyalty and brutality made him an ideal recruit. He initially began as a trusted enforcer, However, Richardson was not only violent and reliable, he was also ambitious and strategic. Before long, he was overseeing drug distribution throughout Glasgow's East End. In the early 2000s, his role rapidly expanded into international operations, establishing connections with criminal networks in Spain and Amsterdam. He set up a pipeline for funneling cannabis and cocaine into Scotland, rapidly increasing his wealth, power, and status. Yet, with rising influence came increased scrutiny. Richardson's name began to appear more frequently in police reports, surveillance operations, and even murder investigations. He was now orchestrating a major trafficking operation, smuggling cocaine into Edinburgh from across eastern Scotland, northwest England, and parts of mainland Europe. He even began converting the imported cocaine into crack, a cheaper, more addictive, and far more destructive drug. However, the empire he was constructing would not remain unchecked for long, as law enforcement was closing in. In 2009, Mark Richardson was apprehended while running a crack cocaine factory in a flat in Ferny Hill, Edinburgh. This bust was the culmination of a 2-year investigation into his nationwide drug operation. Police entered the flat through its unlocked front door and discovered Richardson and his accomplice, Dylan McCollum, actively engaged in processing crack cocaine in the kitchen. A large pot was boiling on the stove, and the pair, completely absorbed in their task, failed to notice the officers quietly entering behind them. The raid exposed a major drug operation. Officers recovered 40.8 kilograms of Class A drugs, including cocaine, heroin, and crack cocaine, with a potential street value exceeding £2 million. It was one of the largest seizures of its kind in Scotland. A broader investigation led to 66 arrests, resulting in 14 convictions and a combined total of 44 years of prison time. Richardson received 10 of those years. At the time, Richardson was also a key player in 2 significant operations, trafficking large volumes of cocaine into Edinburgh. Behind bars, he was forced to leave his meticulously built empire behind and await his release. Following his release, Richardson maintained a low profile. His name occasionally appeared in police reports, but nothing concrete emerged. However, this period of quiet was short-lived. By December 2016, he was back in the spotlight. His eventual downfall accelerated on December 19th when a Police Scotland helicopter tracked him driving at speeds of 65 miles per hour through North Glasgow. The helicopter had been deployed as part of a targeted operation to monitor him, and officers observed him getting into the black Mini Cooper. Realizing he was being followed, though he initially believed it to be rival gangsters, Richardson panicked. He sped off, driving on the wrong side of the road before abandoning the car at an Esso petrol station on Keir Hill Road. He then entered another vehicle but was soon intercepted and arrested by officers from the Organised Crime and Counter-Terrorism Unit. In 2018, Richardson was sentenced to 18 months for culpable and reckless conduct during the high-speed pursuit. However, this was not the only sentence awaiting him. Up until his arrest, Mark Richardson had been at the helm of a powerful crime syndicate, one that would begin to unravel that very same year. The gang went to extraordinary lengths to conceal its vast criminal operation, hiding a terrifying arsenal of weapons, immense quantities of drugs, and millions in illicit cash. Their firearms were secreted within custom-built hidden compartments in a fleet of vehicles stored in heavily fortified lockups. To remain one step ahead of the authorities, they employed cutting-edge surveillance technology, constantly monitoring for any signs of infiltration. At its peak, the network was reportedly importing up to 1 million wraps of cocaine annually, posing one of the most significant challenges to covert policing in Scotland and indeed the UK. With an annual turnover exceeding £100 million, the gang had constructed a sprawling criminal empire that stretched across Britain and Europe. Members even travelled to Brazil, brokering deals directly with drug cartels to smuggle high-purity cocaine into the UK via West Africa. However, everything changed with Richardson's dramatic arrest. After being tackled to the ground by officers, a set of keys was discovered in his pocket, keys to the silver Toyota Yaris. On the surface, it appeared to be an ordinary car, but inside, it contained a trove of evidence that would expose a criminal empire and mark the beginning of the end for one of Scotland's most dangerous gangs. Officers quickly grew suspicious when they noticed a key fob that didn't activate any alarms on the Toyota Yaris. Their intuition proved correct. Hidden in the car's cluster light was a Bluetooth receiver, controlled by the fob. When activated, it triggered a hydraulic ram in the boot, raising a concealed metal plate. Beneath it, police discovered a neoprene holster containing a 9mm Glock 17 handgun loaded with 15 bullets, which bore Mark Richardson's DNA. Just a week later, the investigation led officers to an industrial unit on Croftside Avenue in Croftfoot, South Glasgow. There, they recovered several sets of car keys, including one labelled Annie. Cross-referencing these keys with addresses linked to the gang, detectives made further discoveries. On February 5th, they arrived at a lockup on Whittingham Drive, Anniesland, West Glasgow. This space, rented under a false name, contained a chilling find: 11 firearms, all carefully packaged and labelled. Among them were Glock pistols, a Heckler & Koch submachine gun, and even an M75 hand grenade. Meanwhile, another unit on Westburn Farm Road in Cambuslang had served as a crucial logistical hub. It was here that gang members Francis Mulligan and Anthony Woods worked to modify some of the group's £250,000 fleet of vehicles, equipping them with secret compartments to conceal weapons and drugs. The weapons cache not only revealed a deadly arsenal, but also unlocked a forensic goldmine. Among the discoveries was a Beretta 9000 pistol, later confirmed to have been used in the brutal torture of Robert Allen in March 2015. His DNA on the weapon would become a key piece of evidence in dismantling Scotland's most dangerous crime syndicate. Robert Allen's ordeal began in May 2013, when notorious gangster James "The Don" White appeared at his door. White handed Allen 2 kilograms of cocaine, valued at £90,000, under a bail deal arrangement: no money up front, sell the drugs, and repay the debt from the profits. Whether Allen willingly agreed or felt he had no alternative remains unclear, but backing out was not an option in this world. White connected him with Barry O'Neill, a close associate of the feared Gillespie Brothers, who oversaw the handover. The drugs were hidden in a modified car, concealed behind a false registration plate. However, Allen's plan to distribute the product through Scotland's nightlife scene collapsed when one of the batches proved to be contaminated and unsellable. The anticipated profits never materialized. The debt, however, persisted, and excuses were not accepted in this sphere. The phone calls from White demanding repayment became daily, each more aggressive than the last. Then came a chilling revelation. The drugs had not belonged solely to White. They were the property of the Gillespie Brothers, two of the most violent and ruthless crime lords in the UK. Barry Gillespie began contacting Allen directly, intensifying the pressure. Fearing for his life, Allen went dark, ceased answering calls, and fled north, eventually settling in Portsmouth in a desperate attempt to vanish. But no one escapes the Gillespies. The gang launched a relentless manhunt, utilizing GPS trackers and brute intimidation. Allen's friends and family were threatened, and his movements monitored. The message was unmistakable: no debt goes unpaid. By early 2015, Allen owed £30,000. That debt sealed his fate. In March 2015, Robert Allen was located in Barnsley. Armed enforcer David Sell and 2 accomplices kidnapped him and drove him to a remote industrial unit in Fauldhouse, Midlothian. What followed was an act of torture described as nightmarish. Allen was chained, beaten with a metal bar, and his legs were shattered with a 14-pound sledgehammer. A silenced Beretta pistol was used to pistol whip him. That same weapon, later recovered by police, held his DNA, providing irrefutable proof of what had transpired. This brutal assault was not merely an act of gang violence. It became a crucial turning point, compelling the police to act decisively. It exposed the inner workings of a criminal empire built on fear, drugs, and bloodshed, and it marked the beginning of the end for the Gillespie brothers. In January 2018, Mark Richardson was sentenced to 8 years and 9 months in prison for possession of the Glock handgun seized in Glasgow's Baillieston area. He was sentenced alongside the rest of his crew, bringing a dramatic conclusion to one of Scotland's most dangerous crime syndicates. In total, 9 men were incarcerated, including David Sell, who admitted to the abduction and torture of Robert Allen. Sell received the harshest sentence, 15 years and 8 months. Collectively, the gang was handed a combined total of 87 years behind bars. Richardson is currently serving his sentence at HMP Low Moss. Years later, Mark Richardson's trusted lieutenant, Michael Heaps, orchestrated a high-stakes cocaine scam from his prison cell. Heaps arranged for a courier to defraud Dubai-based crime boss Ross McGill with £500,000 in counterfeit notes during a 5-kilogram cocaine deal. This betrayal ignited a chaotic and violent feud. Ross McGill, a former leader of the Rangers Ultras, was furious. He ordered a wave of violence across Scotland's central belt, including stabbings, shootings, and firebombings. The feud began with the abduction and slashing of the Edinburgh middleman who had brokered the deal, who was dragged back from Thailand and attacked in the street. But McGill didn't stop there. Blaming Richardson directly, he declared war on anyone associated with him. His Tamo Junto gang launched coordinated attacks on homes and businesses linked to Richardson in Edinburgh and East Lothian throughout March 2023. By April, the violence had spread to Glasgow when McGill targeted the Daniels crime clan due to their close ties to Richardson. The homes of clan boss Stephen Bonzo Daniel and his uncle Norman were torched in Bishopbriggs. In late May, 2 men were attacked with machetes in a garage owned by Robert Daniel in East Kilbride. Days later, Richardson ally David Macmillan was ambushed and slashed outside his Edinburgh home by 4 masked men. Although reports claimed a truce was reached on May 30th, the very next day saw Ross Monaghan and Eddie Lyons shot dead outside a bar in Fuengirola, Spain. In recent weeks, chilling footage released by Tamo Junto gang members has promised that the war against Richardson will continue for many years to come. In the early hours of May 17, 2023, at around 2:30 a.m, Police Scotland officers were dispatched to Beechwood Drive, located in a quiet neighbourhood in North Lanarkshire, following reports of a serious disturbance. When the officers arrived on the scene, they were confronted with a shocking and gruesome sight. 3 men, led by 36-year-old Ross Al-Gailani, had unleashed a savage attack on a former member of an organised crime gang. The violence was so extreme that the victim, James Sheridan, suffered catastrophic injuries, ultimately leading to the amputation of one of his legs. James Sheridan was no stranger to the criminal underworld. He had once been deeply involved in organised crime and was previously jailed after being caught in possession of cannabis and a significant sum of £104,000. However, during his time behind bars, Sheridan expressed a desire to leave the life of crime behind. He made it clear that he wanted out of the gang. Unfortunately, his decision to distance himself from the criminal organisation did not sit well with the gang's leadership. The gang boss, who was still bitter about the loss of the drugs and cash, held Sheridan responsible for the setback. Believing that Sheridan was to blame for the failed operation, the gang leader issued a chilling order. Sheridan was to be assaulted as punishment. This order set off a chain of events that would culminate in the horrific attack on Beechwood Drive. Enter Ross Al-Gailani, a man with a seemingly unremarkable background. Al-Gailani was a trained mechanic with only a minor criminal record, but somewhere along the line, he had been drawn into the orbit of a major organized crime group. Despite his limited experience in the criminal world, he had become an enforcer for the gang, a role that would see him involved in some of the most brutal acts of violence that the Scottish underworld had witnessed in recent times. Over the course of 7 weeks, Al-Gailani embarked on a violent rampage, carrying out a series of ruthless attacks on behalf of the crime group. His actions were marked by an extraordinary level of brutality, shocking even those familiar with the dark and dangerous world of organized crime. The attack on James Sheridan was the culmination of this spree, an act of retribution that left the former gang member permanently maimed and marked one of the most violent episodes in recent Scottish criminal history. When James Sheridan was released early from HMP Low Moss, a prison near Bishopbriggs, East Dunbartonshire, close to Glasgow, Scotland, on May 16th, he was tracked to a house in Coatbridge, Lanarkshire. Later that day, Al-Gailani and several others forced their way into the house, breaking down the front door. They found Sheridan in a bedroom with his girlfriend, Samantha Cook, and brutally attacked both of them with machetes and swords. The gang fled the scene as Cook managed to call 999. Sheridan sustained severe injuries to his head, arms, and legs. The wounds were so critical that medics initially doubted his survival, leading to the amputation of his right leg above the knee. He also lost 2 fingers in the attack. His girlfriend, Samantha Cook, also suffered significant injuries, losing 2 fingers from her right hand. Despite attempts to reattach them, they eventually had to be amputated. Remarkably, Sheridan appeared unfazed by the ordeal. A video that circulated widely in Scotland after the attack showed him joking about losing his leg. Later, his partner revealed to the media that the couple had since separated. Al-Gailani's next victim was Scott McCann, who was deeply in debt to the crime gang, owing them a significant sum of £19,000. McCann's horrifying experience began on June 14th, when Al-Gailani picked him up and drove him to a secluded house in Wishaw, Lanarkshire. Upon arriving at the location, McCann was commanded to strip down to just his boxer shorts. His hands and legs were then tightly bound, rendering him completely helpless. While he was restrained, Al-Gailani subjected him to a brutal beating, repeatedly striking him with a baseball bat. Over the course of the next 2 days, McCann estimated that he was hit with the bat over 100 times. The abuse did not stop there. McCann was also forced to place his hand on a hot cooker, and Al-Gailani struck his left hand with a machete 3 or 4 times, causing severe injuries. During this time, Al-Gailani contacted McCann's relatives, demanding they pay off the debt if they wanted him to be released alive. After enduring 2 days of relentless violence, McCann was finally allowed to leave. However, his nightmare was far from over. About a week later, Al-Gailani summoned McCann once again, forcing him to meet him and driving him back to the same house in Wishaw. This time, McCann was ordered to strip naked again, and the abuse escalated even further. Al-Gailani shot him approximately 20 times with an air rifle before beating him again with the baseball bat. In a particularly sadistic act, Al-Gailani involved a toddler who was present in the house, making the child hold the air pistol and ask McCann to raise his hands before shooting him twice. This added a disturbing element of psychological torture to the physical violence. Despite the horrific treatment he endured, McCann was able to escape after agreeing to present Al-Gailani with a plan to generate money for the gang. The court later heard that McCann required surgery following both attacks, including procedures to repair the damage to his hand and remove pellets from his body that were lodged there after being shot with the air rifle. Interestingly, McCann was initially one of the 2 men arrested in connection with the violent attack on James Sheridan, along with Al-Gailani. On July 7th, McCann was taken into custody alongside Tony Redpath, and they both faced serious charges of attempted murder. However, in a surprising turn of events, these charges appear to have been dropped. The reasons behind this decision, or the current status of their legal case, remain shrouded in mystery. In his final act as an enforcer, Al-Gailani targeted a couple living in Helensburgh, Argyll and Bute on July 4th. According to Police Scotland, a man entered their home in Helensburgh's Hood Court around 1 a.m. through an unlocked door and attacked a 19-year-old woman. The young woman, who likely had no prior connection to Al-Gailani, encountered him in the kitchen. He was armed with what appeared to be a police baton and was dressed in an orange high-visibility jacket with a reflective stripe, with the hood pulled up to obscure his identity. Without warning, Al-Gailani struck her twice with the baton as she tried to defend herself. The attack only stopped when her dog began biting his leg, forcing him to flee. The woman sustained significant tendon damage to her left hand, an injury that continues to affect her. The motivation behind this seemingly random attack in Helensburgh remains unclear. During the court proceedings, it was revealed that Al-Gailani was a trained mechanic with a limited criminal history, making his involvement in such severe violence both puzzling and alarming. His lawyer, Brian McCann KC, argued that Al-Gailani had become entangled with an organized crime group during what he described as a chaotic 7-week period marked by these violent offenses. In court, Al-Gailani expressed his horror at watching footage of the attacks, which was shown during the trial. He compared it to watching a horror film and said that the audio alone made him feel physically ill. His lawyer emphasized that Al-Gailani struggled to accept responsibility for his actions and found it difficult to come to terms with the reality of what he had done. Al-Gailani, who has a family including children, now faces the heavy burden of knowing he will miss out on their upbringing due to his imprisonment. The circumstances that led an otherwise unremarkable family man to commit such extreme acts of violence remain a mystery. In sentencing, Judge Lady Stacey condemned Al-Gailani's actions, stating that his 16-year jail term would have been 18 years had it not been for his guilty plea. She described his behavior as despicable, calling his actions cruel, cowardly, and sadistic. Upon his release, Al-Gailani will be subject to an additional 3 years of supervision. The case leaves unanswered questions about how a seemingly ordinary man became involved in such dangerous criminal activities and carried out such heinous acts. At the center of the operation were 3 men who didn't fit the stereotype of brazen criminals. Patrick Gainey, aged 34, from Loughborough, was the mastermind, the strategist who planned every detail with surgical precision. He rarely spoke, but when he did, his decisions shaped the entire gang's movements. He chose targets based on risk and reward, picked times when streets were deserted, and locations far enough from police stations to delay response times. His method was brutal but efficient. Fast, precise strikes that left little room for error. John Smith, 32, from Spalding, was the gang's logistics expert. He found and secured stolen vehicles, mapped out routes for escape, and sourced burner phones to avoid detection. His job was to keep the gang mobile and under the radar. Then there was Tarley Smith, 34, from Bagworth. He controlled the equipment, the kitman who managed safe houses and storage units filled with tools and gear. Everything the gang needed was accounted for and maintained under his watch. Unlike many street criminals, these men were not reckless thrill seekers. Their operations were cold, calculated, and meticulously organized. Roles were fixed. Tasks were assigned weeks in advance. Nothing was left to chance. Each attack was planned long before a single hammer struck glass. The gang chose their ATMs carefully, machines with weak perimeter security, often in shops, petrol stations, or post offices in small towns. Stolen vehicles, often sourced weeks ahead from far-flung counties, were stored in remote garages or hidden on farmland to avoid suspicion. Before an operation, every detail was checked. Number plates were cloned to disguise getaway vans, every tool tested and repacked. Escape routes were not guessed, but plotted days in advance, snaking through back lanes, fields, and even along canal towpaths to avoid police patrols. By the time police started to notice a pattern, the gang had already struck more than a dozen sites, each hit executed with military precision. There were no loud threats, no careless mistakes, just broken glass, emptied machines, and a trail of cash gone cold. Behind the scenes, the same 3 names kept surfacing in connection to the raids. But 3 men alone could not have pulled off such a widespread campaign. They operated with a trusted network of specialists, all with defined roles and deep loyalty. Surrounding the core trio was a circle of hand-picked accomplices, each vital to the gang's success. Alfie and William Boswell, 2 brothers from Bagworth, were the vehicle scouts. More than just thieves, they prepared the stolen vans and cars by cloning registration plates, wiping interiors, and sometimes even repainting vehicles. Their work ensured the gang's mobility and invisibility on the roads. Up north, Gordon McPhee, based near Edinburgh, acted as the gang's northern enabler. He provided intelligence on Scottish targets, coordinated supply lines, and helped the gang blend into the local landscape. Without him, the cross-border raids would have been impossible. Women close to the gang handled logistics behind the scenes. Sarah Haynes, Victoria Smith, and Rosie Mallister arranged travel, booked overnight stays, and scouted locations, all under the guise of everyday errands. They even monitored local radio chatter for police movements, helping the gang avoid detection. Frances Gilhaney, also known as Kathleen Connors, managed the dirty work after each raid. She laundered cash, handled drop-offs, and oversaw untraceable couriers moving stolen money. The common thread holding this network together wasn't greed. It was loyalty, often family ties. No outsiders, no freelancers, just a tight-knit group bound by trust. Every raid was unique, but followed a familiar structure. Outdoor ATMs were ripped free in seconds using stolen vans and heavy chains. The van would reverse hard into the machine, straps fastened tightly, and a sudden roar as the ATM was wrenched free. The gang worked in silence. No shouting, no hesitation. Indoor machines required more force. Doors were rammed, walls breached with vehicles or hydraulic spreaders. Inside, drills and thermic lances bypassed locks with surgical precision. Speed was vital. The goal was to clear the scene before police could respond. Strikes happened in the dead of night between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m., when streets were empty and rural patrols stretched thin. Confidence grew with each success. Cameras were disabled or blinded. Once reflective tape was used to blind CCTV lenses before the gang entered. Cleanup was meticulous. Burned-out vehicles were abandoned, tools discarded or hidden, and DNA wiped with bleach or acid. Gloves were burned or soaked to eliminate evidence. Over time, their techniques became faster, more coordinated, almost like a choreographed dance of destruction. This was no local crew. Their reach extended across England and Scotland, striking over 40 towns and cities during a 19-month spree. The locations weren't random. Attacks in one area were followed by silence, and then a sudden burst in a new region, confusing police forces and spreading resources thin. Gordon McPhee's role in Scotland was crucial. His local knowledge and contacts enabled the gang to extend their operations north of the border, turning what started as a regional threat into a national crime wave. Vehicles swapped constantly. Motorhomes, pickup trucks, sedans, all stolen, cloned, and deployed as needed. These were not simple robberies. They were coordinated campaigns that challenged law enforcement's ability to keep up. By early 2022, small mistakes began to unravel the gang's perfect system. January saw the first real breakthrough when investigators caught Gilhaney and John Smith traveling from Peterborough to Scotland in an unremarkable Fiat motorhome. Automated number plate recognition systems tracked two more vehicles following the same route. One a blue van, another a grey Audi RS4, both with cloned plates. The Audi was later found burned out, linking it to a prior theft in Merseyside. Cross-referencing CCTV, traffic cameras, and recovered tools like drills, crowbars, and even gloves left behind, police began connecting dots. Forensic evidence was decisive. DNA found on a crowbar used in the first attack matched Gilhaney. A key left at another raid linked directly to Tarly Smith. Surveillance placed him near crime scenes days before break-ins. Despite using burner phones, repeated reuse across different jobs allowed police to triangulate signals and trace movements. Slowly, a digital map emerged showing how the gang moved, struck, and escaped. By November 2022, the investigation culminated in coordinated raids involving over 200 officers from 7 forces. Searches in Leicester, Lincolnshire, and Edinburgh uncovered vehicles, cash, stolen gear, and incriminating evidence like thermal lances and CCTV jammers. 10 people were arrested, including the core trio and key members of the network. Each arrest was methodical and calm, no dramatic chases, just the quiet dismantling of a sophisticated crime machine. Patrick Gainey was taken from his home in Loughborough without incident. John Smith was arrested in Spalding after police monitored his movements closely. Tarly Smith was picked up in Bagworth, the same village linked repeatedly to stored vehicles. The Boswell brothers were also arrested, Alfie for conspiracy to steal, and William for similar offences tied to vehicle handling. Gordon McPhee was apprehended in Edinburgh for his role enabling Scottish operations. 4 women critical to logistics and finance were charged with assisting offenders: Sarah Haynes, Victoria Smith, Rosie Mallister, and Frances Gilhaney. Their involvement ranged from travel coordination to laundering stolen cash. By May 2024, the case reached Leicester Crown Court. The evidence was overwhelming. CCTV footage, vehicle data, DNA traces, phone records, and witness testimonies painted a clear picture. Prosecutors described the gang as a cold, organized machine designed to evade detection over 17 separate raids. Each person had a defined role, working together like clockwork to pull off crimes with military precision. Defense lawyers didn't dispute the facts, but argued motivation. For the core trio, economic hardship and desperation were cited as factors driving their involvement. Some defendants claimed they were manipulated or coerced by others in the group. The women's defense focused on loyalty and personal ties rather than criminal intent. They had not profited or planned the crimes, but acted out of obligation to family members. When sentencing came, there were no surprises, only consequences. Judge Brown condemned the crimes as serious and organized, highlighting the social and emotional damage inflicted on already vulnerable communities. Patrick Gainey and John Smith each received 7 years and 6 months, reflecting their leadership roles. Tarly Smith was sentenced to 6 years and 8 months for managing equipment and safe houses. Alfie Boswell got 5 years, and his younger brother William received 3 years for vehicle-related conspiracies. Gordon McPhee, tried separately, was handed 6 years for enabling Scottish operations. The 4 women received suspended sentences of 12 months, recognizing their lesser but still critical roles. This case reveals the dark side of organized crime hidden behind quiet streets and shattered storefronts. What began as isolated attacks evolved into a sophisticated national network operating with cold efficiency. Their downfall came not from a single mistake, but a chain of small oversights, relentless police work, and the power of modern forensic science. It also raises questions about sentencing. Were the punishments severe enough for a gang that terrorized communities across 2 countries? Or does this represent a just balance between justice and rehabilitation?
The Gillespie Brothers of Glasgow, suspected by police to head Scotland's largest crime syndicate, have amassed over £100 million annually through a network spanning global criminal organizations, engaging in activities like arms trafficking and drug smuggling. Despite their notorious reputation for ruthless tactics and involvement in high-profile murders, such as that of Dutch blogger Martin Koch, James and Barry Gillespie remain at large, prompting an intense police manhunt. Their sudden removal from the most wanted list by the National Crime Agency without explanation has left the public speculating on their possible escape or enigmatic demise, while their upbringing in the impoverished suburb of Rutherglen shaped their rise from street-level dealers to prominent figures in Scotland's criminal underworld. Known for their fiery tempers, formidable street-fighting abilities, and expansion into serious offenses like cocaine trafficking, money laundering, and international assassination plots. Let's delve into it. During their early foray into criminal activities, the Gillespie brothers, under the guises of real estate agents James Gardner and Eamon Fitzpatrick, orchestrated the clandestine movement of drugs, firearms, and illicit goods across borders, evading law enforcement detection with their cunning disguises and discreet operations. Settling in Algarve, Portugal by 2008, suspicions surrounding their opulent lifestyle raised questions about the origins and expansion of their illicit ventures. Transitioning from the impoverished streets of Glasgow to the lavish estates of Algarve, the exposure of their vast criminal enterprise in 2009, marked by France's largest drug seizure to date, revealed the brothers' involvement in a multi-million-pound cocaine trafficking operation, despite their vehement denial and attempts to shift blame onto an individual named John Jackson, underscoring the perilous nature and high stakes of their illicit trade. Despite encountering a significant setback, James and Barry Gillespie rebounded swiftly, emerging even stronger and more resolute. Their resurgence marked the rise of what law enforcement termed the most formidable criminal syndicate in the nation, extending their influence beyond European borders into South America, solidifying their position atop Scotland's criminal hierarchy. Leveraging innovative technology, including customized vehicles with concealed compartments and sophisticated phone jamming equipment, along with encrypted communication devices, the brothers stayed ahead of law enforcement, further enhancing their operational security. Their strategic alliances, technological prowess, and unwavering determination propelled the Gillespie brothers to dominance, firmly establishing their reign over Scotland's criminal underworld. In a quest to fortify their security measures, James and Barry Gillespie embarked on the ambitious endeavor of developing custom encrypted communication devices, founding MPC and seizing the burgeoning market demand for privacy-centric mobile technology, strategically leveraging images of whistleblower Edward Snowden to appeal to privacy-conscious consumers. Despite facing scrutiny over alleged ties to the assassination of Dutch blogger Martin Koch, the Gillespie brothers' MPC thrived, underscoring their unyielding determination to excel in both the telecommunications and criminal domains. Koch's sponsorship by MPC shortly before his untimely demise fueled suspicions of the brothers' involvement in his murder, as accusations swirled linking them to orchestrating Koch's demise at the hands of the McGraw Mafia, shedding light on the shadowy world of their alleged involvement in violent acts to safeguard their illicit enterprises. Despite controversies, the Gillespie brothers' enterprise persevered, solidifying their status as formidable players in the telecommunications and criminal landscapes, with Koch's murder serving as a grim reminder of their alleged propensity for violence and intimidation. In the early months of 2004, prior to Martin Koch's tragic demise, another chilling incident unfolded involving Martin Toner, who was slated to face drug smuggling charges in Edinburgh High Courts. However, on June 30, 2004, Toner's lifeless body was discovered in a field near Langbank Village, Renfrewshire, Scotland, revealing a violent end to his life after being lured away by someone he trusted. Despite arrests made in connection to Toner's murder, including individuals like John MacDonald and Douglas Fleming, the case remains unresolved, with insufficient evidence leading to dropped charges and acquittals. 13 years later, in 2017, authorities renewed efforts to seek justice for Toner, hinting at potential involvement by the Gillespie brothers, reigniting speculation about their connections to acts of violence and intimidation in unsolved cases. The unsettling circumstances surrounding Martin Toner's death prompted his wife, who initially reported him missing, to voice suspicions of the Gillespie brothers' involvement, recalling Martin's fury upon their return weeks before his disappearance. Such concerns were validated by a chilling 2002 incident where James Gillespie attempted to fatally shoot Martin, later resorting to a knife in a struggle that forced Martin and his wife to flee to England for safety. Given this history, Martin's anger at the Gillespie brothers' return raises questions of whether James made a second attempt on his life, and if the brothers are responsible for his murder, inviting speculation about the sinister connections linking Martin Toner's fate to the actions of the Gillespie brothers. Prepare yourself for a chilling account revealing the depths of the Gillespie brothers' depravity, as exemplified by the case of Robert Allen documented in 2017 court records. Robert found himself trapped in a nightmarish cycle of violence and fear after allegedly owing a £30,000 drug debt to the gang, leading to his abduction from Barnsley, South Yorkshire. Transported to a remote Scottish industrial unit, he endured unimaginable torture, including brutal assaults and being forced to roll down a hill, resulting in life-altering injuries. Despite the horrors inflicted upon him, Robert miraculously survived, though his tormentors, several of whom pleaded guilty, showcased the brothers' ruthless nature and willingness to inflict extreme violence. In 2020, a chilling revelation surfaced as authorities targeted James and Barry Gillespie in connection to Robert Allen's harrowing abduction, torture, and attempted murder. Yet the brothers remained at large, evading capture and accountability for their atrocious deeds. Their continued evasion of justice serves as a stark reminder of the extent of their criminality and the chilling impunity with which they operate. In 2014, Scottish law enforcement launched Operation Escalade, a robust investigation aimed at dismantling the Gillespie brothers' entrenched organized crime syndicate. Over time, Operation Escalade evolved into a formidable endeavor, bolstered by collaborations with international agencies like the National Crime Agency, DEA, Europol, and Interpol, enhancing its resources and global reach to combat transnational crime effectively. By 2019, Operation Escalade intensified its efforts, deploying a team of 200 specialized officers in a global manhunt for James and Barry Gillespie, ominously dubbed the Escobar Brothers by Scottish authorities. While the brothers remained elusive, significant progress was made in apprehending their associates and lieutenants, signaling a relentless pursuit of justice despite the challenges posed by their elusive targets. In a series of high-profile arrests, Key figures within the Gillespie Brothers network, such as James White and Christopher Hughes, were apprehended in Brazil and Italy respectively, leading to the disintegration of their once loyal network. Operation Escalade, committed to combating organized crime, has secured nearly 50 convictions since its inception, highlighting its unwavering dedication to justice. Meanwhile, speculation persists about the elusive whereabouts of James and Barry Gillespie, central figures in Scotland's most notorious criminal saga, with rumors suggesting refuge in Algarve, Portugal, or Brazil. Despite Operation Escalade's relentless efforts, silence veiled the investigation until 2022, when the National Crime Agency took an unprecedented step, removing the Gillespie brothers from their most wanted list and retracting the reward for their capture. Reports suggested that Scottish police conveyed to the Gillespie family the grim possibility of the brothers meeting their end in Brazil, allegedly executed by a local gang over protection payments. Yet their bodies remained elusive, casting doubt on the account's validity. Despite these perplexing developments, the Organised Crime and Counter-Terrorism Unit in Scotland persisted in seeking information on the brothers' whereabouts, cautioning the public against approaching them, while the absence of concrete evidence fuels speculation about their true fate, leaving the enigmatic legacy of James and Barry Gillespie to linger. The enigmatic legacy of James and Barry Gillespie is riddled with unanswered questions, prompting rampant speculation about their involvement in heinous crimes. As reports surface of their demise in South America, suspicions of a possible cover-up financed by their alleged protectors cast doubt on the truth behind their shadowy exploits, leaving their true fate uncertain.
We delve into the dark and dangerous world of organised crime in Scotland through the life of one of its most notorious figures, Jamie Iceman Stevenson. From his humble beginnings to his ascent as one of the country's most feared drug lords, Stevenson's journey is a chilling tale of ambition, crime, and the relentless pursuit of power. Jamie Stevenson was born in 1964 in Scotland, where he grew up in a challenging environment marked by poverty and social issues. The housing estates he inhabited were often breeding grounds for crime, and as a young man, he quickly learned that the streets could be ruthless. In the 1980s, the UK was grappling with rising drug problems, and Stevenson saw an opportunity to carve out his niche within the burgeoning drug trade. In those early years, he started small, dealing in illicit activities typical of his surroundings. The infamous ice cream wars emerged during this period, an odd yet deadly competition among local drug dealers who used ice cream vans as covers for their operations. Stevenson became entrenched in this underworld, realizing that these seemingly innocuous vehicles could serve as ideal fronts for drug distribution. The conflict escalated as various factions battled for territory, leading to violence and, tragically, loss of life. These ice cream vans became synonymous with the underbelly of Scottish society. What started as a means of providing basic groceries and treats for local communities quickly devolved into a battleground for drug dealers. The drug trade was relentless, with ice cream vendors morphing into heroin and cocaine distributors. Stevenson capitalized on this chaos, carving out his own territory amid the turf wars that defined this era. With the increasing demand for drugs, Stevenson's operations grew in scale and complexity. He began establishing connections with suppliers, learning the ins and outs of the drug trafficking business. His ability to navigate this dangerous world set him on a trajectory towards greater power and wealth. As he gained notoriety, he also attracted attention from law enforcement, but his cunning and resourcefulness allowed him to evade capture for years. By the early 2000s, Jamie Stevenson was no longer just a small-time dealer. He had emerged as one of Scotland's leading drug traffickers. His ability to orchestrate large-scale importations of cocaine was unparalleled. In fact, he was among the first in Scotland to tap into the multi-million-pound cocaine market, making millions while simultaneously evading law enforcement. Stevenson's criminal prowess did not go unnoticed. In 2003, the Scottish police launched Operation Folklore, targeting Stevenson's extensive drug network. This operation would take 4 years, during which authorities amassed evidence of his extensive criminal activities. They discovered that Stevenson was not just dealing in drugs, he was also heavily involved in money laundering, making it difficult for law enforcement to trace his illicit profits. In 2007, after years of investigation, Stevenson was finally brought to justice. He was convicted of money laundering and sentenced to over 12 years in prison. However, his time behind bars was relatively brief. He was released just a few years later, in 2014. But for someone like Stevenson, freedom meant returning to what he knew best: the drug trade. The allure of quick money and the adrenaline rush of criminal activity were too strong to resist. Upon his release, Scotland was experiencing another surge in cocaine trafficking. It was the perfect environment for Stevenson to re-establish his operations. He wasted no time in diving back into the drug business, leveraging his extensive contacts and experience. By this time, the cocaine market had evolved, with new players and methods of distribution emerging. However, Stevenson was no stranger to adapting, and he quickly reasserted his dominance in the market. His operations expanded beyond Scotland. He had connections across Europe, facilitating the importation of drugs from Central and South America. Stevenson was known for orchestrating elaborate schemes to smuggle cocaine into the UK, often utilizing ports like Liverpool as entry points. His expertise in logistics allowed him to arrange for shipments hidden among legitimate cargo, such as crates of bananas. In one remarkable operation, Stevenson arranged a shipment valued at £76 million, showing not only his ambition, but also his organizational skills in orchestrating such complex smuggling operations. When law enforcement eventually intercepted the shipment in 2020, it marked a significant blow to his operations and demonstrated the risks associated with such large-scale trafficking. As the cocaine boom continued, Stevenson's criminal empire flourished. He was deeply involved in the logistics of drug importation, managing every aspect of the operation. From negotiating deals with suppliers to coordinating shipments, he was a key player in the drug trade. His ability to arrange vast quantities of cocaine into the UK was unmatched, and his profits skyrocketed. However, with great power came greater scrutiny. Law enforcement agencies began to hone in on Stevenson, increasing their resources to dismantle his operations. He became a target of multiple investigations, and his previous convictions only compounded the urgency to bring him to justice. In this high-stakes environment, he had to constantly innovate and change tactics to avoid capture. Despite his best efforts, the law was never far behind. Stevenson's criminal history caught up with him as law enforcement agencies intensified their efforts to dismantle his network. He was linked to numerous violent incidents, including a high-profile murder case involving his best friend, Tony McGovern. This murder was believed to have stemmed from disputes over money, further illustrating the violent nature of the drug trade. In the wake of increasing scrutiny, Stevenson faced additional charges related to drug trafficking and money laundering. His operations were under constant surveillance, and authorities were determined to gather enough evidence to bring him down for good. In recent years, as part of ongoing investigations, his conversations were intercepted through encrypted messaging apps like EncroChat, leading to even more incriminating evidence against him. The information gleaned from these communications painted a clear picture of Stevenson's operations, revealing the extensive network of criminal associates and the scale of his drug trafficking. Despite his attempts to evade capture, Stevenson's luck ran out. He was apprehended in 2023 while staying with another Scottish criminal in Holland, where he had sought refuge. Authorities had been tracking his movements, and the culmination of evidence against him was substantial. At the time of his arrest, he was named one of the UK's 12 most wanted criminals. His capture was a significant victory for law enforcement, signaling that the long arm of the law had finally caught up with the elusive Iceman. Jamie "Iceman" Stevenson admitted directing the importation of the drug, which was seized by Border Force teams at Dover in September 2020. The other members of his gang were jailed for a total of 29 years. The plot was uncovered after an encrypted messaging platform used by criminals was infiltrated by French police. Stevenson had also planned to flood Scotland with millions of etizolum tablets, also known as street Valium, from a factory in Kent. The 59-year-old from Rutherglen in South Lanarkshire was a leading figure at the top level of organised crime in Scotland. He was once described as Scotland's answer to Tony Soprano, the Mafia boss portrayed in television series The Sopranos. In 2022, he featured on a list of the UK's 12 most wanted men. He was jailed for a total of 20 years when he appeared for sentencing at the High Court in Glasgow. 5 other men, David Bilsland, Paul Bowes, Gerard Carbin, Ryan McPhee and Lloyd Cross, also pled guilty to serious organised crime and drug offences. Carbin was jailed for 7 years. Bilsland, Bowes and Cross were each jailed for 6 years, and McPhee was jailed for 4 years. Lewis Connor, 27, was jailed for 3 years in July after the investigation found encrypted phone messages which proved he had set fire to properties and vehicles across central Scotland. So, what does the future hold for Jamie "Iceman" Stevenson? His life story serves as a cautionary tale about the seductive nature of the drug trade. It highlights the risks that come with pursuing power and wealth through illegal means. While some criminals manage to evade justice for years, others find themselves ensnared in the very system they sought to exploit. As we look back on Stevenson's life, it becomes clear that the cycle of crime is often relentless. The allure of quick riches can be difficult to resist, even for those who have experienced the harsh realities of imprisonment. Stevenson's journey through the criminal underworld illustrates the challenges faced by law enforcement in tackling organised crime, as well as the complexities of human nature and ambition. Thank you for joining us in this exploration of the life of Jamie "Iceman" Stevenson.
In today's episode, we examine a case that resulted in the capture of a notorious gang, described by the police as a super gang, led by former long-haul truck driver David Sell. This case was the focus of Operation Escalade, an initiative aimed at dismantling major drug and gun syndicates. The key witness against Sell was initially a prime suspect in the murder of Gerbil Carroll. However, an assassination attempt on this witness and the subsequent flight of members from a notorious crime firm raised questions about who would take over the criminal empire and how long they could hold power. Let's delve into it. David Sell's gang, known as the Super Gang, generated over £200 million annually as a major drug supplier. The gang operated with 9 core members, including former soldier Martin Fitzsimmons, cocaine dealer Mark Richardson, and electronics expert Francis Mulligan. They were the primary distributor of cocaine across Scotland, England, and Wales, using advanced counter-surveillance techniques and cutting-edge surveillance equipment. The gang's arsenal of weapons rivaled that of a Hollywood action movie, with drugs and firearms concealed in an SUV and fortified lockups. Law enforcement faced significant challenges, including conducting risk assessments to protect undercover officers. David Sell and his gang attracted the attention of authorities and were observed interacting with major cartels in South America and Brazil. Operation Escalade, funded by the government, aimed to dismantle major drug and gun syndicates with shared intelligence from UK police, the DEA, and Interpol. David Sell journeyed to Brazil to connect with cartels for pure cocaine, overseeing its transport to Europe via West Africa. With control over concealment and packaging, he led a £200 million gang, seemingly untouchable by law enforcement. The crew shared profits, operating with military precision. But as they planned revenge on a traitor, tensions threatened their unity in operation. In March 2015, Robert Allen got caught up in a £45,000 deal with the Super Gang as a small-time drug dealer. He brokered a deal with gang member Barry O'Neill, but it went south when he failed to come up with the funds. Despite Allen's efforts to return the drugs, the gang demanded £30,000 from him. With a huge debt hanging over him, Allen fled Scotland as he couldn't afford to pay up. However, David Sell's gang had already anticipated his escape by secretly placing a tracking device on Allen's car. Seeking refuge in Barnsley, South Yorkshire, Alan's attempt to escape sparked amusement from David Sell. But Sell knew he had to take action to avoid setting a precedent for other debtors. Sell and his gang decided to follow Alan's movements using the tracking device on his car. They eventually tracked him to a housing estate in Barnsley, where Sell hatched a plan to lure Alan out. Sell wrote a note and placed it on Alan's car windshield, pretending to be a concerned neighbor with a parking issue. Meanwhile, Sell and his gang members strategically positioned themselves around Alan's residence. When Alan discovered the note and investigated, one of Sell's associates deflated Alan's tires while Sell and the others approached his house, ready to confront him. Robert Allen found himself in a terrifying situation as he opened the door, only to be met with a swift attack from David Sell wielding a can of Stella. The physical altercation that followed was chaotic, with Allen managing to defend himself by pushing Sell away and locking the door. However, two other gang members had already breached the rear of the property by smashing a patio window and were rushing towards him. In the midst of the chaos, Allen managed to disarm one of the assailants of a handgun and incapacitate him with a knee strike to the groin. But before he could fully take control of the situation, he was blindsided by a blow to the face, causing him to lose the firearm. He was then subjected to further violence as one of the gang members pistol whipped him. Sell entered the room through the shattered patio window, chuckling as he settled into an armchair without saying a word. The tension in the room was palpable as one of the gang members accused Allen of stealing from them, emphasizing that it was a matter of principle rather than money. Allen was then bound with a chain and forcibly taken to a waiting van, where Sell and another member joined him, while the rest followed in a BMW. The journey that followed was grueling, lasting 7 hours before they arrived at an abandoned warehouse in West Lothian. Over the course of more than 24 hours, Allen endured relentless physical abuse, including a brutal assault with a sledgehammer that left him with a broken leg. He was further traumatized with a Beretta 9000 equipped with a silencer and had bleach sprayed onto his wounds. One of the gang members expressed concern for Allen's survival, fearing the consequences of a potential murder charge. Allen was stripped, washed down with a pressure washer, and subjected to dehumanizing treatment. Throughout all of this, David Sell remained silent and refrained from taking part in the violence. The next day, Allen was hooded and taken to East Kilbride, where he was shot 3 times in the kneecaps by 2 gang members, with Sell notably absent. Despite his excruciating pain, he was ordered to crawl towards the motorway, but his injuries made him immobile. The gang heartlessly reminded him of his debt before pushing him down a hillside, leaving him in agonizing pain. Allen lost consciousness halfway down the hill and was later found by a couple walking their dog. He was rushed to the hospital and underwent months of extensive treatment for multiple fractures, with his injuries posing a serious threat to his life. The trauma of his harrowing ordeal would haunt him for years to come. The investigation into Robert Allen's abduction faced hurdles due to a lack of substantial information. Despite Allen's inability to identify any captors, he singled out David Sell. However, Allen's statement indicated Sell had not participated in violence or wielded a weapon. He was just present with a can of Stella. Furthermore, no tangible evidence connected Sell to the crime scene. Sell provided a solid alibi supported by phone GPS data, placing him elsewhere during the abduction. His alibi was confirmed by his friend David McFarlane, who said Sell had spent the evening at his flat sharing drinks. With no concrete evidence against Sell, police hit a dead end. Sell's decision to stay silent hindered progress in the case. Despite ongoing assault charges against Allen, lack of evidence linking Sell to the incident stalled the investigation. Police were stuck, unable to establish Sell's presence or involvement in the kidnapping. 2 years later, Operation Escalade was targeting criminal enterprises, including the Gillespie Brothers organization. With incriminating evidence and arrests looming, the Gillespie siblings fled to Brazil, the source of their illicit goods. In their absence, James White took over the drug empire with Paul Fleming as his second-in-command. David Sell's criminal network was also a key target, with estimated profits of £200 million. Law enforcement surveilled locations linked to Sell, maintaining radio silence to avoid detection. CCTV cameras were strategically placed to cover routes. During Operation Escalade, officers monitored Mark Richardson, a member of Sell's gang, approaching a silver Toyota Yaris in Glasgow. Richardson tried to evade capture but was eventually caught by armed police. A hidden compartment in the car's trunk revealed a Glock 17 handgun with Richardson's DNA, leading to the unraveling of Sell's criminal operation. The firearm would have gone undetected if not for the officers' observation and discovery of the concealed compartment showing the sophistication of Cell's criminal activities. Law enforcement made a shocking discovery the following week when they found multiple sets of keys, including one labeled Anna in an industrial unit on Croftside Avenue in Crawford, a district of South Glasgow. Another key location was identified on Western Farm Road, known as a vital logistics hub. It was suspected that this site was where Francis Mulligan and Anthony Woods worked on modifying a portion of the gang's vehicle fleet, estimated at £250,000. By carefully matching the keys with addresses linked to the gang, authorities were led to a storage facility on Whittingham Drive, Anniesland, in the West End of Glasgow, on February 5, 2017. The gang had rented this space under a false identity, paying £500 in cash up front each month. The lockup had a noticeable metal door secured with 2 padlocks, different from the other rundown wooden doors in the facility. Detective Chief Superintendent McLean highlighted the discovery of a key fob labeled Annie that helped in narrowing down the search to Anniesland. Upon entering the storage unit, officers found a stash of 11 firearms meticulously packed and labeled. The weapons included Glock pistols, a Heckler & Koch submachine gun, and an M75 hand grenade. The crucial discovery, however, was finding Robert Allen's DNA on a Beretta 9000 pistol fitted with a silencer, the same gun used in his assault in March 2015. This breakthrough provided tangible evidence linking the gang to criminal activities, especially the brutal attack on Allen. Alongside the firearms, the uncovering of advanced surveillance equipment was eye-opening. This state-of-the-art technology highlighted the significant gap between law enforcement capabilities and the sophistication of criminal operations, necessitating beefed-up security measures to address vulnerabilities. A notable revelation was the gang's skill in maintaining a low digital footprint by using jamming surveillance equipment to shield their phone signals, making it impossible for police to intercept their communications. Law enforcement was stunned by the unprecedented firepower possessed by the criminal group, setting a new benchmark in organized crime history in Scotland. The level of weaponry and its sophistication posed a significant challenge to authorities in combating the gang's illicit activities. The gang's trial, initially set to span 3 months, took an unexpected turn with David Sell's plea of not guilty. However, David McFarlane, age 61, testified in court, claiming Sell was with him during the kidnapping incident involving Robert Allen. Paul the Captain Fleming, a key figure tied to the shooting of Kevin the Gerbil Carroll, was a lieutenant to James the Don White, who took over the Gillespie Brothers' operations. Fleming faced an assassination attempt but narrowly escaped, later getting involved in a car crash. Surprisingly, Sell and his associates pleaded guilty after the failed hit on Fleming, leading to a much quicker resolution than the anticipated trial. Sell's guilty plea contradicted McFarlane's testimony, resulting in McFarlane's arrest. Sell received a hefty sentence of 15 years and 8 months for the abduction of Robert Allen, while other gang members also faced severe penalties for their criminal activities. Barry O'Neill got 7 years and 4 months for drug distribution. Anthony Woods got 11 years and 1 month for organized crime involvement. Francis Mulligan got 8 years and 324 days for similar charges, and Michael Bowman got 7 years for his role in the gang. Gerard Docherty received a sentence of 10 years and 6 months for a shooting incident. Mark Richardson got 8 years and 9 months for possession of a Glock handgun, and Stephen McCardle received 7 years and 100 days for a similar offense. Martin Fitzsimmons, a 37-year-old ex-Army veteran, was imprisoned for 10.5 years for possessing illegal weapons and funds. Police noted the gang's involvement in large-scale cocaine importation, emphasizing their status as major suppliers to organized crime groups. The statement also highlighted the gang's significant firepower, marking a dangerous escalation in Scotland's organized crime landscape. In 2019, accountant David McFarlane faced consequences for his false alibi, receiving a 3-year prison sentence. This underscored the justice system's commitment to holding all parties involved in criminal activities accountable. Following the downfall of the Gillespie Brothers' drug empire, James the Don White took over and was later sentenced to 10 years in prison in 2023 for drug trafficking and ties to organized crime. Authorities dismantled his illegal business, with jokes circulating about his wealth surpassing even Rolex. Paul Fleming, another key member, was also convicted and received a 9-year sentence. The fallout extended to Joe Shields, defense lawyer for David Sell, who was violently attacked and left with life-altering injuries. The Gillespie brothers fled to Brazil to avoid prosecution, but rumors suggested they met a grim fate. Robert Allen, a victim of a brutal attack, continues to suffer from permanent injuries and requires assistance for mobility, highlighting the lasting impact of organized crime's violence. David Sell's gang, known for brutal assaults and fear-inducing access to firearms and resources, evaded police scrutiny with forensic expertise and were dubbed the Super Gang. Operation Escalade continues as investigations into criminal activities remain ongoing. Assets linked to key figures like James the Don White and Sell are being traced internationally by the DEA and Interpol, with seizures underway. UK law enforcement has seized assets from drug cartels, including real estate, vehicles, cash, and businesses acquired illegally. Seizing criminal assets has become a key strategy in dismantling crime networks, shifting the perception that crime leads to financial gain. The government's pursuit of illicit proceeds has proven effective in deterring criminals, who struggle to prove the legitimacy of their acquisitions. This approach represents a significant change in how crime is perceived, with authorities targeting criminal profits to dismantle illegal enterprises. In September 2023, Ireland witnessed its most significant cocaine seizure during a high-profile event on the cargo ship MV Matthew. This incident triggered an extensive law enforcement inquiry that unfolded after the interception, revealing a staggering 2.25 tons of cocaine. Subsequently, authorities apprehended 9 individuals and interviewed all 25 crew members. The investigation quickly established a connection between the seized cocaine ship and 2 notorious criminal organizations, the Kinahan Cartel and the Scottish Mafia. However, the ties between these European criminal powerhouses extend beyond this particular event. Some observers have gone so far as to label the Kinahan Cartel as the Irish counterpart to the Scottish Mafia, and this characterization is not unfounded. In this video, we will explore the intricate details of this ominous alliance. Let's delve into it. Over the past 2 decades, Christy Kinahan, with his sons Daniel and Christopher Jr., and a formidable armed group, has significantly expanded their illicit activities beyond Dublin. Their criminal influence now extends across a substantial portion of Europe's cocaine imports, as well as operations involving arms smuggling, cybercrime, extortion, and money laundering. Their clientele includes Mexican cartels, Asian jihadists, and, more recently, Iran's intelligence services. The Kinahans have also entered into dealings related to military technology and aircraft, further solidifying their presence in a network of nefarious enterprises. Establishing themselves as key facilitators in the criminal underworld, they serve as intermediaries connecting South American suppliers with European buyers. Their methods closely resemble those uncovered during the interception of a cocaine shipment off the Cork coast, where the Kinahans collaborated with the Colombian drug cartel El Clan del Golfo. While suspicions suggest the Scottish mob's involvement in managing the European leg of the operation, the Kinahan cartel's ties to organized crime in Scotland add complexity to the investigation. Notably, Daniel Kinahan's associate Sandra Vaughan, former CEO of MTK Global, a boxing firm linked to Daniel, has a history with Scottish drug dealer Kevin Kelly. As the intricate web is unraveled, deeper connections between the Kinahan cartel and Scottish organized crime emerge. Kevin Kelly initially entered a business partnership in a Marbella construction venture with the Kinahans, but their association took a dark turn with the discovery of a thwarted kidnapping plot in Spain. Simultaneously, the U.S. Department of Treasury accused the Kinahan gang of using the Glasgow-based vodka brand Nero Drinks as a front for laundering drug profits. Led by Johnny Morrissey, with his wife Nicola as the primary shareholder, Nero Drinks appeared innocuous but concealed a more intricate nature. Morrissey, deeply involved in organized crime and considered the Kinahans' chief financial facilitator, was arrested in September 2022. Following his apprehension, Spanish authorities dismantled Europe's largest Hawala narco bank, recognized for its extensive involvement in money laundering operations. Morrissey is suspected of annually laundering around 300 million euros from drug proceeds, cleverly channeling the funds into cryptocurrencies. A closer examination reveals the Kinahan cartel's significant infiltration into Scottish society, utilizing it as a laundering hub for the proceeds from their illicit transactions. In Glasgow, the criminal landscape is defined by 2 rival families, the Daniels and the Lyons, entangled in over 70 territorial conflicts as they fiercely compete for dominance in Scotland's drug market. The Lyons family, in particular, has gained notoriety for engaging in various criminal activities, including drug trafficking, extortion, violence, and organized crime, making them one of the most influential criminal forces in Scotland since the 1990s. The family's humble origins evolved into a rapid expansion that extended their influence across diverse territories, reaching multiple countries. Currently, their operations span the United Kingdom, Spain, and even the United Arab Emirates. Over 2 decades, they have been deeply entrenched in a deadly feud with the Daniel family, another criminal group based in Glasgow. This feud, lasting for more than 20 years, has seen numerous shootings, some fatal, and others narrowly avoiding fatalities. Firebombings, assaults involving knives and machetes, and the day-to-day operations of drug trafficking have all been part of this intense conflict. The animosity began in the summer of 2001 when the Daniels clan lost a significant stash of cocaine from a Milton residence, subsequently traded with the Lyons gang. Feeling a threat to their territory, the Lyons responded aggressively, sparking a conflict that significantly reshaped the crime landscape in the region. In December 2006, Lamb Hill, Glasgow, saw the dramatic Apple Row Motors ambush. Linked to the Daniels, Raymond Anderson and James McDonald targeted a garage owned by a Lyons family member, resulting in a brief but intensely violent confrontation. Sadly, one man lost his life, while 2 others, including future Lyons leader Stephen Lyons, barely survived. Anderson and McDonald were later convicted and sentenced to prison. The turmoil continued with the targeted killing of a significant Daniels member, Carroll, known as Gerbil. Carroll's connection to the Lyons family traced back to his school days, where he was a victim of their bullying. This association pushed him closer to the Daniels, earning him the infamous moniker Public Enemy Number 1. In 2010, while parked at a supermarket, Carroll fell victim to a targeted attack. Masked gunmen arrived, firing shots into the back seat of his locked Audi, resulting in his instant death, and the entire attack unfolded within a mere 25 seconds. Subsequent investigations identified Billy Peterson, a significant figure in the Lyons family, as one of the gunmen in the targeted attack. He received a life sentence for his role in the crime, marking a crucial turning point for the Lyons gang. After surviving the 2006 shooting, Stephen Lyons sought refuge in Spain and reportedly formed connections with the Kinahan cartel. This alliance injected fresh vigor into the Lyons, strengthening their position in the ongoing territorial conflict and providing the Kinahans with a lucrative avenue to sell drugs in Scotland. Lyons further solidified his ties with the Kinahans by relocating to Dubai. Notably, the Lyons gang experienced substantial growth, significantly consolidating their influence by 2016. A pivotal shift occurred with the unfortunate passing of Jamie, the leader of the Daniels family, succumbing to cancer. This event significantly altered the balance of power, tilting it in favor of the Lyons, a shift highlighted by a surge in violence in 2017, including a brutal assault on Stephen Bonzo Daniel. In May 2017, using a concealed tracker, the Lyons gang pursued Stephen Daniel's car, resulting in a high-speed chase that concluded on an off-ramp. The confrontation escalated into a violent attack on Stephen Daniel, involving knives and machetes. Despite the intensity of the assault, he managed to survive. In subsequent legal proceedings, Stephen Daniel denied any ongoing rivalry between the Daniels and the Lyons, with both groups preferring to keep their conflict off the legal radar. Despite law enforcement launching Operation Engagement to curb the feuding clans, the conflict persisted, resulting in more casualties, arson incidents, and assaults. Additionally, the decryption of EncroChat secured servers played a vital role in disrupting criminal operations during this tumultuous period. A significant incident involved Glasgow's drug kingpin, Darren Collin, known as Big Papa, who held considerable respect in influential circles in Costa del Sol, Dubai, and Dublin. His robust connections extended to both the Lyons gang and the Kinahan cartel. Big Papa's methods in Scotland earned admiration even from the upper echelons of these criminal organizations. The drug kingpin faced an 8-year jail sentence after police cracked an encrypted phone, linking him to a €1.3 million stash of heroin and cocaine, along with a substantial amount of cash. The connection between Scotland and the Kinahans was solidified through Robert Kelby, associated with the Lyons gang. Kelby played a pivotal role in setting up a gym in the Canary Islands linked to the Kinahans. Despite surviving 3 assassination attempts, Kelby frequently appears alongside Tyson Fury, also connected to Daniel Kinahan. The collaboration between the Kinahan and Lyons families was close-knit, strategically boosting their illegal earnings through a series of violent acts in Scotland. However, with the Irish mob placed on the U.S. Most Wanted list, the Kinahans have distanced themselves from various affiliates, including the Lyons. This distancing leaves the latter vulnerable, especially with a $15 million bounty hanging over the Kinahan cartel. The increased pressure has shifted focus to Scotland's underworld, and Glasgow, already holding the unsettling record for the highest number of drug-related deaths in Europe, becomes a critical center of attention. The ongoing feud between the Lyons gang and the Daniels clan has transformed Glasgow into a hub for criminal activity. This situation is further compounded by the potential halt in the supply of high-quality narcotics to the Lyons if the Kinahan cartel severs ties. Such a move could potentially plunge Scotland's criminal landscape into even greater chaos. That wraps up today's video. What are your thoughts on the topic discussed? Share your opinions in the comments, and don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel for more upcoming content.